Szeretném köszönteni minden kedves délutáni résztvevőnket. Robin Edina vagyok, az ELTE fordító és tolmácsképző tanszékének vezetője, és nagyon szeretnék üdvözölni mindenkit itt a délutáni szekcióban, a Translating Europe workshopon, amelyet a fordítási főigazgatósággal együtt szervezünk meg, és immár a TransELTE hagyományos programjának számít. És a felvezetés után szeretném felkérni Nikola Kuntét, az Európai Bizottság fordítási főigazgatóságától, ahol ő a személyzet és szervezetfejlesztési osztály vezetője, és sokáig az IMT hálózatnak is koordinátora volt, és szeretném felkérni, hogy nyissa meg délutáni szekciónkat.
Hello everyone, thanks for the nice introduction. I'm really happy and proud to be here today with you. And first of all, I would like to greet you all, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, fellow translators, dear professors, and also dear students. As I said, it's a great pleasure for me, and I also have a sense of honor that I stand before you today to open this Translating Europe workshop on behalf of the European Commission, of the Directorate General for Translation of the European Commission. As some of you may know, this is my third invitation to address this esteemed gathering. The first one was already in 2020, but alas, the pandemic intervened and our plans were thwarted. Then last year, COVID struck a second time. I caught the virus, and again, circumstances conspired against us. But now, finally, in 2024, I made it to the TransELTE Conference in Translation Studies. Third time lucky, as they say. And here indeed I am, ready to delve with you into the crucial topic of quality and efficiency in translation. Is it worth cutting corners? Before we dive into our discussions, allow me to shed some light on the significance of the Translating Europe initiative and the general purpose of these workshops. With the Translating Europe project, DG Translation targets various stakeholders in the world of translation: universities, the language industry, national language institutes, translation services in EU countries, professional associations. And we are seeking to encourage a more structured cooperation with and between all these stakeholders. The idea is to create a community of interest with a view to giving visibility to the world of translation, sharing good practices, developing common projects, and promoting a diversified and sustainable market for professional translators in Europe. To this end, every autumn, there is an annual Translating Europe Forum in Brussels. And throughout the year, Translating Europe workshops are being organized in all the EU countries. This year, it is the third time that ELTE University has been integrating such a Translating Europe workshop in its yearly TransELTE conference. I am extremely happy about this involvement of ELTE in the Translating Europe initiative, because ELTE is a member of the European Masters in Translation Network, another flagship initiative of DGT, which I had the pleasure to coordinate for the past 10 years or so. I'm equally pleased about the fact that so many scholars from the EMT network have been participating in the TransELTE conference throughout the last 2 days. This is a visible sign that the collaboration across our network is working well. And their participation is also a wonderful illustration of multilingualism in Europe, because as I saw from the program, I couldn't be there, unfortunately. There has even been a Dutch session translated and interpreted into Hungarian yesterday. So really congratulations for showing and showcasing multilingualism. Let me briefly remind you of the goal of the EMT network. The aim of the EMT is to improve the quality of translator training in Europe and to enhance the employability of young translation professionals. ELTE has been a member of the EMT network since 2010 and is the only EMT university in Hungary. Now that I'm standing in front of you here in your great faculty hall, I would like to seize the opportunity and thank you, ELTE professors and lecturers, for contributing so actively to this truly European network. And my thanks go especially to our main EMT representatives, Edina, Reka, and Enike. By exchanging with your fellow professors and trainers from across Europe on curriculum design, by exploring with them emerging trends, or experimenting with cutting-edge tools, you not only bring back to your students new insights that will equip them with the skills they need to thrive in the profession. By collaborating with your partners from all corners of Europe in an atmosphere of mutual trust, you also show your students that you live the European values that underpin our interactions, foster understanding, and promote harmony across diverse cultures. Leading by example on this will help your students to broaden their horizons and will enable them to take the global perspective, which is a capacity that will be useful for them in whatever area they will eventually work after their studies. Let me get back to our workshop. As already mentioned, Translating Europe aims at linking public and private translation stakeholders, giving visibility to the role of translation, the translation profession, and at exchanging good practices. The workshop today serves as a platform for professionals like us to come together, exchange ideas, and explore strategies to enhance the quality and efficiency of our translation practices. As translators, we are all too familiar with the perpetual dilemma of balancing quality and efficiency. The pressure to meet tight deadlines while ensuring accurate and culturally appropriate translations often leads us to ponder whether it's worth cutting corners. Today, we aim to dissect this dilemma, scrutinize its implications, and perhaps uncover innovative solutions. Dear colleagues, we probably all agree that quality in translation is non-negotiable. It's the cornerstone of our profession, underpinning trust, credibility, and effective communication. However, in a world where time is of the essence, efficiency cannot be overlooked. Finding the delicate equilibrium between these two facets is a perpetual challenge, one that requires constant reflection, adaptation, and refinement. I don't have the intention to develop this issue more in detail here. The panelists who will shortly discuss this topic, are much better placed to do that. They have the relevant expert knowledge and will look at it from many different angles. My competence is on another field. Being responsible for the European Masters in Translation, I would like to highlight in this context the crucial link between quality and training. I strongly believe that the European Masters in Translation Network plays a pivotal role in shaping the future of our profession by equipping graduates with the necessary skills and competence to navigate this complex landscape. The EMT has defined the core competences that translators need to succeed in their profession. The EMT competence framework encompasses linguistic proficiency, cultural sensitivity, technological proficiency, project management, and interpersonal skills. Students in the EMT programs not only acquire the necessary linguistic skills and techniques for the transfer of meaning from one language to the other. During their studies, they are also exposed to real work experiences and to collaborative student projects, where they learn to manage their time effectively during the various stages of the translation process. By teaching such competences in an academic settings and by collaborating closely with the language industry, the universities of the EMT network aim to ensure that their graduates are equipped with the right professional skills, including those that empower them to strike the delicate balance between quality and efficiency. Looking at how universities prepare future language professionals, how they have been encouraging them to embrace technology, how nowadays they teach students to collaborate effectively with AI systems, show them how to use AI as a tool to enhance productivity. Looking at all this, I'm confident that translators are not becoming an endangered species, as the title of one of the following sessions may suggest. Translators, and I mean human translators, trained according to professional standards, remain essential for quality, trust, context, creativity, and cultural understanding. Having said this, let us now embark on this workshop and seize the opportunity to learn from each other, to challenge conventional wisdom, and to collectively elevate the standards of our profession. Thank you for your attention, and I wish us all a productive and enlightening workshop ahead. Thank you very much.
Nagyon szépen köszönjük Nikola Kunténak a megnyitó beszéd, elgondolkodtató szavait. Az ELTE FTT nagyon hálás és nagyon büszke arra, hogy egyedüli egyetemként, vagy hogy egyáltalán tagjai lehetünk ennek a hálózatnak, amely folyamatos kihívás és inspiráció is számunkra, hogy megfeleljünk annak az európai irányvonalnak és európai minőségnek a fordító képzésben, amelyet tanulunk folyamatosan az IMT hálózaton belül. Hogyha valakit érdekel közelebbről, hogy mi az, amit tanulunk, és mi az, amiben részt veszünk, nagyon szívesen beszámolunk a kollégákkal, és biztosak vagyunk abban is, hogy ma így a Translating Europe Workshopon belül is sokat fogunk tanulni. Ennek jegyében szeretném felkérni első előadónkat, Ingemar Strandvikot, aki az Európai Bizottság fordítási főigazgatóságának minőségügyi felelőse, hogy tartsa meg Translation Quality and the Role of Expectations című előadását.
Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share some ideas on this topic. As we have heard, translation quality is on everybody's lips these days. The focus on quality is understandable, it's fully justifiable, and it's even necessary for a number of reasons. We heard this morning Professor Haltai outlined several of these reasons, not least the disruptive impact that the rapidly evolving technology is having on working methods and expectations. But what is quality? What do we understand by translation quality? Do we understand the same thing? And if we don't, is it a problem if we don't? This is what I would like to discuss. And I clicked once, and I clicked twice. Sorry, pointing to the back? No? Okay. So a brief outline of what I will be discussing. So what do we mean by translation quality? I will stress the role of specifications. I will also introduce you to a brand new ISO standard that was published 1 week ago. I will say a few words about the role of translation quality evaluation, and will present another ISO standard that was published a month ago. So there are two really brand new standards out there which have an implication for the topic of today. So what do we mean by translation quality? If we take a closer look We see that translation quality is something that everybody wants, but not so many people feel comfortable defining or talking a lot about. It is notoriously difficult to agree on what translation quality is. This, to get a bit of perspective, this is not surprising. People have been debating, arguing, and disagreeing on what makes a good translation for at least 2,000 years. So the question is absolutely not new. So for 2,000 years, people have been dwelling about this. Some 50 years ago, we had a more scientific approach to the question, to translation and translation quality emerged and developed into an area or a discipline called translation studies, where we have had a lot of different scholars coming up with different theories and models for understanding what translation is and what translation quality is. And during the last decades, we have had new actors intervening in this discussion. With the surge of translation industry, and not least with machine translation, we now have industry actors and IT developers or MT developers and IT people also adding theories and models for translation quality and translation quality and quality evaluation. The result of all this is a bit of a mess. All sorts of ideas coexist out there. You would have people still arguing that translation quality is about fidelity to the source text. Others would say, no, it's fitness for purpose, or some people would say, no, it's too subjective. We can't even try to measure it. Others would say things like, you know what it is when you see it. Others would say that it's a question of what the client wants. If the client is happy, then that is quality. And then we have this cost efficiency aspect, which, if you make it happen within the budget, then that is translation quality. This is, as I said, it's understandable that it's a problem to define and is not really clear. Still, there is an issue, because if you don't know what it is that you want, you are not likely to be able to set up a translation project in the most appropriate way or in the most efficient way. And if you don't know what it is that you want, you're not likely to be able to evaluate afterwards if you got what you want. So in this situation with all these different theories and models, the range is huge, from the most simplistic sales pitch, kind of influencer-like simplistic views on translation quality, to rather simplistic views that work for very reduced use cases or implementation situations on the one extreme, to extremely complex academic, very interesting and very complex academic constructs, which from a hands-on perspective, of a pragmatic perspective of those who carry out the work, are totally unrealistic to apply in real life. There is, though, one model that I find interesting as a middle ground, an approach that was presented, a proposal of how to define translation quality that was proposed by 5 Americans some 10 years ago in a series of articles in Tradumatica, a journal you are probably aware of. And they came up with this idea. It was a quality management expert, an academic, hands-on practitioners. And their idea is that translation quality has to be seen as a compound of 5 different quality perspectives. The first one is the transcendent perspective to translation quality. Translation quality as something that exists in absolute terms. This is the first. Often translators want to do the best possible. It's a kind of frequent point of departure for the translators who do the actual work. The second perspective is the product perspective, kind of the service provision perspective, translation quality as compliance with requirement, fitness for purpose. The third perspective is the process perspective or production perspective, with the idea that translation quality is something you build up throughout the production or throughout the process, with the idea that quality is something you achieve by applying certain processes, and sometimes defined in a specific way, and sometimes even in applied in a specific order. Part of this is also the integrity of the processes, that they have to be effective and they have to be efficient. The fourth perspective is the user perspective. Translation quality as something that means that the client is happy, the users are happy, they find what they need, they think that the text worked as intended. And the fifth and not last but not least, what they call the value perspective, which is the cost efficiency perspective, and the quality aspect of staying within the budget, return on investment. So all these quality perspectives need to be, are important and need to be handled within a translation project. I mean, this is the reference to the article. So based on this, they come up with an operational definition of translation quality that embraces these five aspects. They say a quality translation demonstrates accuracy and fluency required for the audience and purpose, and complies with all other specifications negotiated between the requester and the provider, taking into account end user needs. So all these five quality perspectives need to be identified, they need to be monitored and measured and evaluated to ensure quality. This takes us to the role of specifications. So why are specifications important? Well, actually, specifications is a key element in any type of service provision. If you want a new bathroom or a new kitchen, you specify that you want a freezer with a fridge or not, or a dishwasher, or if you want a microwave or an oven or not at all. You decide, you specify if you want a bathtub or just a shower, the quality and the type of tiles and the colors, etc. You would never ask a company to build you a bathroom or a kitchen without specifications, for the simple reason that if service provision was handled in this way, absence of specifications in any type of service provision is a recipe for miscommunication, and miscommunication means inefficiencies, and inefficiencies means economical problems. In the translation business, this is a recurring problem. The absence of specifications or translation briefs, as it were. Juliet Scott, I don't know if you know her, in her research and her book, Legal Translation Outsourced, She found in the masses of legal translation assignments she studied, more than 90%, 94 I think, were commissioned without any kind of specification, without any kind of brief whatsoever. This is important because Anthony Pym, he coined the concept of binary and non-binary translation errors, where binary errors are errors that are clearly right or wrong, no discussion. Everybody would agree that this is an error. And non-binary errors are translations that are not necessarily clearly right or wrong, but rather more or less appropriate. And the problem with translation is that most of the issues are of the non-binary kind. And it's precisely through translation briefs or specifications that you manage to disambiguate these issues and get away from this problem with subjectivity that could occur if you don't address it. And in this context, it is interesting that ISO just published a new guidance standard focusing on how to develop structured translation project specification, ISO 11669. It was published last week, so I would be very surprised if any of you have seen this. It's interesting because it's the first time ever that ISO develops a standard that is targeting not just the translation service providers, but the clients and the requesters, stressing that they have a shared responsibility for the development of the specifications. They have to be involved in a needs analysis and in a risk assessment reflection together with the translation service provider. And the idea is that once you have the translation specifications developed, they guide the entire translation project. They guide the way you set up the project. They guide the way what resources you will use and what workflow processes you will apply. They also guide the production stage, the actual translators, post-editors, revisers, or evaluators. They will use the specifications as the yardstick against which they decide whether solutions are good to go or not. And the specifications also afterwards guide any kind of analysis of feedback or evaluation that takes place afterwards. So the idea is that you have to identify the quality requirements and turn them into specifications with the help of translation project parameters. And these parameters, I don't think you can read on screen, but there are three types. There are content parameters, like target language, source language, purpose, audience, style requirements, register requirements, and so on. That is one type of parameters you should specify. Another is the process parameters, the technology to be used, pre-processing, and type of translation, whether you apply in-process quality checks, second pair of eyes or not, and if additional tasks are part of the project, like desktop publishing, etc. And then there are a number of important other project parameters, such as risks, the risk assessment and the risk tolerance analysis reference, reflection, reference materials, and if there are deadlines and if there are any confidentiality issues involved. So in order to make this happen, this might look a bit daunting, but the trick in this standard is that for each of these parameters, there are a number of guiding questions. And No, it jumped. So for each of the these parameters, you have guiding questions. And like, to take an example, purpose. The examples of guiding questions: why is this translation needed? How will it be used, or what is it for? That's the kind of, for each of the parameters, you have these guiding type of guiding questions, and the reply to the guiding question constitutes the specification for the parameter concerned. So it's a very hands-on and direct way of eliciting specifications and get a series of specifications to guide the whole project. Now, what is important here is that you proceed step by step. You first identify the use case by the content parameters, and then you analyze the risks and any other project parameters. And only once you have this information, you decide on the workflow processes to be used. You don't start with the decision that you should use, for instance, machine translation. You first check whether the requirements are appropriate for that, or with post-editing or with revision. Yeah. And the most important novelty here is that risk management gets a lot of prominence. It's with this cost cutting, I mean, what Nikola referred to, the pressure of cutting costs all the time. It's the question of risk becomes more and more important. So the risk assessment and the idea of risk tolerance level becomes crucial. And this is something that has to be discussed and decided by the translation service provider together with the client. So once you have, I mean, if you follow these processes, then from a process perspective of translation quality, you're supposed to be safe. However, from a product perspective, the fitness for purpose, compliance with requirement, at some point you need to evaluate if what you have set up as a process delivers the results that you want. And for this, for at least for high risk document or documents with high quality requirements, such evaluation is typically done. I'm clicking here kind of desperately to see what happens, but I don't know. Is it? Should I be pointing? All of a sudden, so normally this is done by something that is called translation quality evaluation, TQE, sometimes called translation quality assessment, or often, which you can't see, you only see the L, but you can guess, LQA, language quality assessment. But this kind of approach to evaluation requires a strategy that covers a selection of error typology. You need to decide which errors you want to use or that makes sense for you, and also which granularity of the errors. We heard before that they were using the project that is using DGT's error evaluation, translation quality evaluation model. We have a very high level system. We don't have any granularity, major granularity, because we don't think we need it. But in other contexts, there might be a need to have very granular errors. This is something that needs to be decided. You also need to set up a metric, a scoring model, where you decide on penalty points, error weights, and severity multipliers that you apply to these errors when you annotate. And you need to decide on sampling, sample sizes, sample chunk sizes, and the frequency of the sampling. And very importantly is to calibrate the system. You need to decide on pass-fail thresholds of the scoring model. And if many evaluators are involved, you also need to have a training in place, guidelines, decision trees, etc., to ensure inter-rater reliability, sometimes called inter-annotator agreement. I mean, the fact that different evaluators should reach the same results when to a sufficient extent. And for this kind of things, there is there are many models out there. But I would stress MQM, the multidimensional quality metric, as something important. There is this website with lots of material. MQM is widely used in industry in different constellations, and MQM actually originated in a European Commission funded project some 10 years ago called QT21 and QT Launchpad, where different existing models for quality evaluation were identified and analyzed and kind of merged into some kind of pre-standardization. It consists of a scoring model, but also of a very elaborate, hierarchically structured error repository from which you select those error types that make sense to you. And on this site, there are lots of resources on metrics and decision tree proposals and information on sampling. The other thing I wanted to mention with regard to evaluation is this other ISO standard that also is brand new. It was published a month ago, ISO 5060. It's the first time ever ISO develops a standard on evaluation. They have failed twice during the last 10 years to agree on reach consensus, but this third time they managed. And this standard is a bit like this MQM core site. It's a guidance. Both the standards are guidance standards, which means that they provide guidance on best practices. It's not a requirement standard, so you do not get certified against it. It's just for guidance. And the conclusions I would like to draw is that if we get back to the topic here, quality and efficiency, cutting corners, is it worthwhile? I would argue that in principle, the reply is no. It's not worthwhile because of the negative connotations of cutting corners. But except for in contingency situations, crisis situations, of course, then you have to find solutions. But I would nuance this no and stress that it depends on the specifications and, importantly, on the prioritization of these 5 quality perspectives I mentioned. So you might have, and also it's very important is that it depends on the client or the TSP. From the client perspective, cutting corners means getting the job done cheaper, paying less for the work. This is risky, but if the risk tolerance is high, then it's definitely an option. And perhaps the client doesn't need top-notch quality for publication. Perhaps the client needs a translation for gisting purposes, basic understanding. And then it would mean perhaps cutting corners with regard to the transcendent quality perspective, but it would not mean cutting corners with regard to the project perspective. A product perspective, meaning the specifications would specify that this is the kind of quality that is needed, and overdoing it would be a waste of resources. So this cutting corners, it depends. From the translation service perspective, the provider's perspective, it is more tricky. Cutting corners with regard to the transcendent perspective is okay if it's in the specifications. But for the other perspectives, user needs and the integrity of processes, it's not a sustainable idea to cut corners. But just to say that, and of course, to get clarity on this, you need specifications in the first place to see what you're dealing with. And of course, improvement, efficiency gains, if they mean improvement of workflow processes, that kind of cutting corners is of course something positive. And sometimes crisis situations makes you think out of the box and explore things that you didn't think of, ways of working that you didn't think of before, and they might end up in efficiency gains and cutting corners in the positive sense of improving workflow processes. But in order to determine whether it is an improvement of workflow processes or an efficiency gain in the value perspective, but to the detriment of the other perspectives, you need evaluation. If you don't evaluate, you don't know. So to conclude, I think that these 5 quality perspectives is a kind of hands-on, useful way of approaching the very complex concept of translation quality, and that these 5 perspectives need to be, as I said before, they need to be identified, you need to monitor them, and you need to evaluate them to be safe and sustainable. And for that purpose, these 2 brand new standards are of good use, and also the MQM site. Thank you very much.
Nagyon köszönjük ezt az érdekes előadást, és szeretnénk folytatni a témát, és felkérném Farkas Ágnest, aki a DGT mesterséges intelligencián alapuló eszközök tanácsadó szolgálatának vezetője, és magyarul fogja tartani az előadását. Nagyon köszönjük.
Köszönöm szépen, Edina. Kicsit tartok a kattintgatástól, de remélem meg tudom oldani. Köszönöm szépen a bemutatást. Ahogy Edina említette, arról fogok beszélni, hogy az Európai Bizottságban hogyan használjuk a mesterséges intelligencián alapuló eszközöket. De mielőtt belevágnánk ebbe a témába, szeretnék egy személyes anekdotát megosztani önökkel. Ugyan a mesterséges intelligenciáról fogok beszélni, de én magam is humán fordítóként kezdtem a karrieremet. Méghozzá itt az ELTE-n, 21 évvel ezelőtt itt diplomáztam francia szakos fordító tolmácsként, és azóta sem jöttem vissza, úgyhogy ha esetleg meghatódottnak tűnök, vagy elcsuklik a hangom, akkor ez azért lesz, mert nagyon megható itt lenni 21 évvel később, és a pulpitus másik oldaláról beszélni önökhöz. Nézzük, hogy működik-e a kattintgatás. Így előre nem? De oké, szuper. Ugye Ingemar elmagyarázta az elméleti hátterét a minőségbiztosításnak. Én egy másik oldalát szeretném megmutatni a mesterséges intelligencián alapuló eszközöknek. Gyakorlati példákat hoztam arra, hogy milyen eszközeink vannak, hogyan használjuk ezeket az eszközöket. Különös tekintettel arra, hogy ezek az eszközök hol tudják kiegészíteni a humán munkafolyamatokat, vagy esetleg teljesen helyettesíteni. Ugye itt a képernyőn látják az összes eszközünket, amit jelenleg a fordítási főigazgatóság nyújt a bizottságon belül, illetve a tagállamoknak is. Én 3 eszközről fogok ma beszélni, az e-translationről, amit azt hiszem, hogy sokan önök közül ismernek, esetleg használnak is. Fogok beszélni az úgynevezett e-summary-ről, és a legújabb termékünkről, amit pedig úgy hívunk, hogy e-briefing. Ezen az oldalon, azt hiszem meg fogják osztani a szlájdokat később, ezen az oldalon megtalálják az összes eszközt. Vannak mások is, van szövegfelismerő eszközünk is, illetve néhány másik, de ma már nem lesz arra időnk, hogy ezekről is beszéljünk. De mielőtt az eszközökről beszélünk, kik is a mi felhasználóink? Ugye alapvetően ezeket az eszközöket, elnézést a klikkelési problémákért, elsősorban az uniós intézmények fordítóinak készítettük, illetve a többi kollégának az intézményeken belül, de az összes eszközünket nem csak az uniós intézmények finanszírozzák, hanem az úgynevezett Digitális Európa program is, és ez a Digitális Európa program lehetővé teszi, hogy az uniós tagállamokon belül, illetve még 4 másik országban, Norvégiában, Izlandon, Liechtensteinen és Ukrajnában közigazgatások, egyetemek, kis- és középvállalkozások, illetve civil szervezetek is használhatják ezeket az eszközöket. Ami nagyon fontos, ezt nem látják, mert ezt én kitakarom a képernyőn, hogy ez az eszköz ingyenes, viszont regisztrálni kell minden külsős felhasználónak. A regisztrációs oldalt is mindjárt megmutatom. Nem lehet esetleg a laptopon kattintgatni az egyszerűség? Nem? Nem, oké. Ez a regisztrációs oldalunk, tehát akiket ugye említettem, a tagállamon belül a külső felhasználók használhatják az eszközöket, de ezen az oldalon regisztrálniuk kell. Ezen kívül semmi más nem kell tenniük, ahogy ez megtörtént, használhatják az eszközöket. Ugye kezdjünk az e-translation-nal, amit azt gondolom, ahogy mondtam, sokan ismernek, úgyhogy nem fogunk azért nagyon sok időt tölteni ezzel, de mi is ez az e-translation? Az e-translation az uniós intézmények saját fejlesztésű neurális gépi fordító eszköze. Ugye azok, akik itt foglalkoznak gépi fordítással, minden bizonnyal tudják, hogy az e-translation előtt is volt a bizottságnak gépi fordítási eszköze, de ez az eszköz, amit 2017-ben indítottunk el, ez az akkor elérhető legújabb technológián, a neurális gépi fordítási technológián alapul. Nagyon fontos ez a saját fejlesztés, ugye miért döntöttünk úgy, hogy kifejlesztünk egy saját eszközt. Nagyon fontos volt az Európai Bizottság számára, hogy egy biztonságos belső rendszerrel dolgozhassunk. Így ez nem egy külső rendszert vettünk meg, és azt fejlesztettük tovább, amit a többi eszközünknél azért inkább ez a jellemző, hanem a fordítási főigazgatóság egy másik főigazgatóság, az úgynevezett Connect főigazgatósággal közösen fejlesztette ki ezt az eszközt. Mit lehet csinálni az e-translationnál? Webfelületeken elérhető, itt elvileg volt még egy sor. A fordítási főigazgatóságon belül használják a fordítóink. Itt azért azt fontos elmondani, hogy nem kötelező a gépi fordítás használata. Egy a sok rendelkezésre álló eszköz közül. A fordítóink, amikor elindítanak egy fordítási projektet, akkor megkapják a gépi fordítási memóriát, és attól függően, hogy ez milyen eredményeket ad, van, aki használja, van, aki nem. Ugye mi fordítunk az összes uniós hivatalos nyelvre, és értelemszerűen egyes esetekben jól működik, más esetekben nem annyira jó. Ezen kívül lehet használni webfelületeken, illetve IT alkalmazásokban is. Hova kéne ezzel? Így középre? Így jó lesz? Jó. Tehát weboldalakon, IT alkalmazásokban is lehet, igen, ez egy kicsit nehéz, de bele fogok jönni. Illetve van egy webfelületünk, ezt is meg fogom mutatni, ahol egyéni felhasználók használhatják ezt az eszközt. Okay. Tehát ez a webfelületünk. Ez igazából nem különbözik semmiben az valószínűleg önök által is ismert más ingyenesen elérhető eszközökkel. Rövid szövegrészleteket és dokumentumokat tudunk itt lefordítani. Az e-translation jelenleg 32 nyelvet fed le, az összes uniós hivatalos nyelvet, és ezen kívül még másik 8-at. Ez a 8 nyelv az arab, az orosz, a kínai, a japán, a norvég, az izlandi, a török és az ukrán nyelv, amit 2 évvel ezelőtt adtunk hozzá az e-translationhöz. Ezen kívül egy példát fogok mutatni a weboldalakon való használatra, és itt rá is térnék arra, hogy melyek azok az esetek, amikor adott esetben az emberi fordítási folyamatot kiegészíti, illetve helyettesíti az e-translation. Itt egy magyar példát hoztam, Ez a weboldal, ez a mezőgazdasági főigazgatóság weboldala, ugye az egyik legnagyobb főigazgatóság, nagyon-nagyon sok tartalmuk van a mi weboldalainkon. Ugye az Európai Bizottság számára borzasztóan fontos, hogy a lehető legtöbb nyelven elérjük az uniós állampolgárokat, de annyira nagy mennyiségű weboldalunk van, hogy ezt a mi fordítóink a fordítási főigazgatóságnál egész egyszerűen nem tudják lefordítani, és ezekben az esetekben ajánljuk az e-translation használatát. Ugye itt ebben a példában magyarra szerettem volna lefordítani. Ahogy látják, a fordítás magyarra, nem tudom mennyire lehet hátul látni, van egy ilyen felirat fordítás magyarra, arra kattintva megkapjuk a fordítást. Ami viszont sokkal fontosabb itt, hogy van egy olyan link is, ami azt mondja, hogy fontos tudnivalók a gépi fordításról. Miért említem ezt? Azért, mert ugye a minőségről már nagyon sokszor volt szó. Hogyan próbáljuk, gyakorlatilag ez egy felelősségkizáró nyilatkozat, de nagyon fontos számunkra az, hogy bárki, aki ezeket az oldalakat olvassa, az rögtön tudja, hogy ez gépi fordítás. Ugye visszatérve erre a kérdésre, hogy mely esetekben helyettesíti, egészíti ki, mi csak akkor használjuk a gépi fordítást az oldalainkon, hogyha ezt nem tudják a mi humán fordítóink lefordítani, és ez az úgynevezett felelősségkizáró nyilatkozat, ez erről szól. Ez ugye elmondja, hogy ez egy alapvető tájékoztatást nyújt, tehát számunkra a gépi fordítás nem helyettesíti a humán fordítást. Ugye azt is elmondjuk, hogy semmiféle emberi beavatkozás itt nem történt, illetve felhívjuk a figyelmüket az olvasóknak arra, hogy az uniós jogszabályok fordítására ne használják az e-translation-t, mert azok megtalálhatók, az összes hivatalos verzió az megtalálható az EULEX honlapon. Tehát nagyon fontos, hogy mindig ott van a felelősségkizáró nyilatkozat, és abban az esetben is, amikor a tagállami partnerek használják az e-translation-t, mi megkérjük őket, hogy használják ezt a felelősségkizáró nyilatkozatot. Ugye ez egy mód arra, hogy próbáljunk megőrizni egy bizonyos minőséget, illetve hát, hogy tájékoztassuk a klienseinket. Tehát nagyon röviden ez a felhasználási területe az e-translationnek. Próbálok a következő szlájdra átmenni, igen. Ugye eddig, amit mutattam, az nem nagyon különbözik attól, amit a piaci szolgáltatók tudnak. Ami egy fontos megkülönböztető tényező az e-translationnél, az az, hogy az úgynevezett témaspecifikus fordítást nyújtunk. Ez lefordítva azt jelenti, hogy különböző motorok vannak az e-translation mögött. Ugye itt látják középen, van egy úgynevezett EU Formal Language, tehát ez egy uniós szövegekre specializálódott motor. Vannak ilyen szép kis rajzaink is hozzá. Van egy másik, amit általános szövegekhez ajánlunk. Van egy olyan, ami igen, most visszamennék, de addig is mondom, van egy olyan, amit a bíróság fordítási alapján készítettünk, illetve van egy motorunk, amit pénzügyi motornak hívunk. Ugye, amit nagyon fontos, hogy emögött a motorok között témaspecifikus szövegek, párhuzamos szövegek állnak. Azt gondolom, hogy akik dolgoznak az e-translationnál, minden bizonnyal ismerik az uniós motort, csak erről szólnék egy pár szót. Az uniós motor ez kizárólag az uniós fordításokon alapul, a bizottság, illetve a többi intézményekből kapott fordításokon. Van egy adatbázisunk, amit úgy hívunk, hogy Euramis, és ebben kizárólag a mi saját szövegeink vannak. Ez a gépi fordítás szempontjából azt jelenti, hogy mi a bizottságban rendelkezünk egy olyan adatbázissal, ami senkinek nincsen a piacon, nem csak méretben, tehát ez egy elég nagy méretű adatbázis, de leginkább minőségben. Tehát ennek a minősége azért egy nagyon magas minőségű adatbázis. Ez az EU Formal Language motor, ez kizárólag ezen alapul. Viszont, hogyha egy olyan szöveget szeretnének fordítani, ami egy általánosabb témájú, akkor az általános motor sokkal jobban fog működni. Tehát nagyon fontos erre emlékezni, hogyha használják esetleg az e-translation-t, hogy válasszák ki a megfelelő motort. Próbálom ezt irányítani. Ugye említettem, hogy az egyik legfontosabb szempont, ami miért a bizottság kifejlesztette a saját fordítási eszközét, ez a biztonság és az adatvédelem volt. Minden eszköz, amit mutatni fogok, és maga ugye az e-translation is, a bizottság tűzfala mögött működik, ami azt jelenti, hogy egy nagyon biztonságos környezetet tudunk teremteni, ezt is próbálom mutatni. Mindazonáltal titkos anyagokhoz nem használjuk, és ezt is kérjük a klienseinktől, hogy észszerűen használják az eszközt, ne töltsenek fel semmi olyat, ami bizalmas információkat tartalmaz. A másik nagyon fontos tényező számunkra az adatvédelem. Az e-translation-t nem tanítjuk azokon az adatokon, amit önök feltöltenek, tehát bármit oda feltöltenek, azt gyakorlatilag letöltés után közvetlenül letörlődik. Van rá lehetőség, hogy 24-72 órán belül visszamenjenek az eszközhöz és ezt megnézzék, de mi nem fogunk belenézni. Illetve azáltal, hogy regisztrálni kell külső felhasználóknak, ez azt is jelenti, hogy ezen az úgynevezett EU loginon keresztül jutnak be a rendszerre, és így csak önök látják azokat az anyagokat, amit feltöltöttek. Ugyanúgy személyes adatok kapcsán mi nem tartunk meg semmit. Tehát egy nagyon biztonságos környezetet tudunk biztosítani, amiben mind az adatok védettek, mind az anyagok védettek. Jó. Térjünk arra át, hogy a bizottságnál hogyan használjuk az e-translation-t, és milyen felhasználási esetek vannak. Itt hoztam néhány statisztikát arról, hogy mennyit használják az e-translation-t a kollégák a bizottságnál. Ezt nem tudom, hogy Ingemar említette, az elmúlt években olyan 2,6-2,5 millió oldal között fordítottak a humán fordítóink, ugye ez egy nagy szám, viszont ehhez még hozzájött tavalyi évben 23 millió oldal, amit a kollégák az e-translation-nel fordítottak le. Amikor azt mondom, hogy kollégák, ezek az egyéb politikai területen dolgozó kollégák, akik számára hozzáférhető az e-translation, és a tavalyi évben 23 millió oldalt fordítottak. Most miért említem ezt? Ugye azt már említettem, hogy számunkra a gépi fordítás, az e-translation, ez egy kiegészítő szolgáltatás, ami semmi esetre sem helyettesíti a humán fordítókat, viszont ez a szám mutatja, hogy milyen magas fordítási igény van ma az Európai Bizottságon belül, és hogy azáltal, hogy tudunk egy ilyen eszközt biztosítani, milyen hatalmas fordítási igényt tudunk lefedni, azon túl, amit a szakképzett humán fordítóink tudnak elkészíteni. Ez a szám egyébként folyamatosan nő, 2022-ben 9 millió oldalt fordítottak a kollégák, és 2023-ban már 23 millió oldalt. Érdekes lehet önök számára az is, hogy Magyarországról hány oldalt fordítottak a felhasználók. 2023-ban az intézményeken kívüli felhasználók 6 millió oldalt fordítottak az e-translationnál. Itt látják az első 10-et, Németország az jellemzően mindig az első 3-ban benne van. Magyarország a 12. a ranglistán, nem mintha ez egy verseny lenne, de azt gondolom, hogy érdekes lehet ez a szám. Magyarországról 497 regisztrált egyéni felhasználónk van, és a tavalyi évben mintegy 200 000 oldalt fordítottak le a felhasználók. Tehát elég népszerű Magyarországon, a 12 ez egy nagyon jó hely a sorban. Ugye, ahogy látták, nem csak a tagállamok használhatják, hanem még másik 4 ország, illetve igazából sokan mások is, például Mexikó is, különböző bilaterális egyezmények révén. Az eszköz elérhető, használják, én azt gondolom, hogy a teremben szinte mindenki használhatja a kategóriánk alapján, úgyhogy ha érdekli önöket az eszköz, akkor mindenképpen regisztrálnak és használják. Egy hatalmas téma következik, a minőség, és nem fogok ezzel sok időt tölteni, Inge már 30 percig beszélt a minőségről, és azt gondolom, hogy még egész nap folytathatnánk. Azért azt szeretném megmutatni, hogy a gépi fordításnál ugye a minőség kérdése az nagyon összetett, nagyon sok mindentől függ az, hogy milyen minőségi fordítást kapunk. Igen, én közben klikkelek, ezt nem tudom, hogy tényleg rosszul csinálok valamit, sikerül. Megpróbálok kicsit arrébb jönni, lehet, hogy így jobb lesz. Ugye nagyon sokban fog attól függni, hogy milyen a szövegtípusunk, milyen nyelvpárokkal dolgozunk, illetve hogy amikor tanítottuk a motort, akkor mennyi adatunk volt és milyen tisztasági adatunk. Ennek a mérése egy nagyon komplex folyamat. Én itt egy dolgot hoztam ma, az úgynevezett TER mérőszámot, ami igazából arra szolgál, hogy meg tudjuk nézni, hogy a nyelvek egymáshoz, a nyelvpárok egymáshoz hogy viszonyulnak, illetve azt is meg tudjuk nézni, hogy a motorok frissítése után adott esetben mennyivel lett jobb a minősége a gépi fordításnak. Amit itt látnak, az angolról a 24 európai nyelvre való fordítás, itt ez a mérőszám 0,2 és 0,4 között volt tavaly, ugye a ter az 0 és 1 között van. Megnéztem a magyart, ez azért is érdekes, mert reggel hallottuk Heltai professzortól, hogy magyarról angolra szinte jobban fordít a gép, mint a humán fordítók. Én nem tudom, hogy ők milyen rendszert használnak, azért nekünk nem teljesen ez a tapasztalatunk. Azt ugye itt látják, hogy angolról magyarra és franciáról magyarra 0,29 volt ez a mérőszám, ami relatíva jó a többi nyelvhez képest. Magyarról angolra szintén elég jó, 0,29, magyarról franciára 0,4, ami az egyik legrosszabb. De hát ettől függetlenül mi nem gondoljuk azt, hogy a gép jobban fordítana magyarról angolra, mint a humán fordítóink. De azt gondolom, hogy érdekesek ezek a számok. Még egyszer mondom, önmagában azért ez sokat nem jelent. Ami sokkal érdekesebb, azok a humán értékelések. Ugye erről Ingemar és a kollégák egy nagyszerű tanulmányt írtak az egyetemek bevonásával. Úgyhogy mindig ebben a kontextusban érdemes beszélni a minőségről, de azt gondoltam, hogy érdekes lehet önöknek megmutatni a tert. Na most minőségről beszélve hoztam egy példát, mert amikor félremegy a fordítás, akkor nagyon félre tud menni. Nem tudom, hogy mennyire látható az idézet a képernyőn. Ez egy francia idézet a francia elnökség idejéből. Emmanuel Macron azt mondta, hogy felolvasom franciául, ha esetleg vannak franciás kollégák, és valaki szeretne egy megoldást mondani erre, ezt nagyon szívesen venném. Notre union ne réussit jamais aussi bien que lorsqu'elle défend ses valeurs et ses intérêts. Azt előre bocsátom, hogy a gépi fordítás teljesen félrement, úgyhogy nem tudom, hogy valakinek van-e esetleg valami gyors javaslata erre. De ha nincs, akkor elmondom, hogy a gépi fordítás hogy fordította. Ugye, aki nem franciás, itt ez a szöveg ez nagyjából azt jelenti egy nyers fordításban, hogy az uniónk fellépése akkor a legsikeresebb vagy leghatékonyabb, amikor saját értékei és érdekei védelmében jár el, vagy megvédi a saját értékeit és érdekeit. Sajnos a gépi fordítás pontosan az ellenkezőjét fordította, és azt mondta, hogy az uniónk sosem védi meg az értékeit és az érdekeit. Igen. Na most, ugye ezt nem értelmezte. Azért hoztam ezt a példát, mert ez sajnos egy nagyon illusztris oldalon jelent meg. A tanács elnöksége az évek óta használja a gépi fordítást, és az Emmanuel Macron felvezető beszéde volt a francia elnökség kapcsán. Ugye az az oldal, az mindig 3 munkanyelven, humán fordításban jelenik meg, de hát például a magyarra gépi fordítás, az összes többi nyelvre gépi fordítással működik. Hát ez egy elég nagy hiba, és elég gyorsan kaptunk is azért visszajelzést erről. Ilyenkor persze bele lehet nyúlni és lehet javítani. Én pont az előadás előtt beraktam az e-translationbe, még mindig nem jól fordítja, úgyhogy ezt majd mindenképpen erről jelezni fogok. Azért szeretem volna megmutatni, mert nálunk a bizottságnál mind a nyelvi osztályokon és mind a technológia részéről teljesen egyértelmű, mi nem gondoljuk, hogy a humán fordítást helyettesíteni a gépi fordítás. És erről is szól a következő szlájdom. Ez a cikk, nem tudom, hogy olvasták-e, a Politikóban egy pár hónappal ezelőtt megjelent egy cikk, ami azt a kérdést tette fel, hogy ki ölte meg az uniós fordítókat. A cikk szerint az én szektorom és a gépi fordítás, de szeretnék mindenkit itt megnyugtatni, hogy nem öltünk meg senkit, és nem is ez a célunk. Érdemes elolvasni, azt gondolom, hogy a cím az egy klasszikusan szenzációhajház cím, de nagyon sok érdekes adat is van a cikkben, illetve azt gondolom, hogy mutatja azt, hogy mennyi félelem kapcsolódik a technológia témaköréhez még ma is. Tehát nem öltük meg a fordítókat. Ahogy említettem, számunkra az e-translation egy kiegészítő eszköz, egy olyan eszköz, amit akkor használunk, amikor nem érhető el humán fordítás. Ugye erről beszéltünk a főigazgatóságon, ez csak egy eszköz, amit használhatnak a fordítók, és a többi, például a weboldalakon kiegészítésként használjuk. A weboldalak kapcsán nagyon fontos és nagyon pontos szabályaink vannak arról, hogy mikor használható. Jogszabályok, kiemelt politikai tartalom esetén például egyáltalán nem használjuk. Ehhez ugye azért elmondanám, hogy a példa, amit mutattam, az pont nem ezt mutatja. Nekünk ajánlásaink vannak, viszont alapvetően a weboldal tulajdonosától fog függni, hogy ők hogyan használják az e-translation-t. Amit azért itt még elmondanék, most nem fogok visszalépni, mert végre sikerült lépnem, de azért azt elmondanám, hogy amit látunk, hogy az angol fordításra való igény csökkent. Tehát az angol fordításnál látjuk, hogy itt igenis helyettesíti a humán fordítást. Mondjuk ennek megvan a magyarázata, jellemzően angolról fordítunk a hivatalos nyelvekre, viszont az angol osztályunk a tagállamból beérkező anyagokat fordítja, és itt a kollégák az egyszerűbb megoldás felé mennek, amikor csak megértésre van szükség, akkor az e-translation-t fogják használni. Mi a jövő a gépi fordításnál, és utána még néhány röviden, mert csak 5 percem van, beszélek a többi eszközről. Használunk úgynevezett szuperszámítógépeket, mi a Meluk színát használjuk, ami Luxemburgban található. Ezt azért használjuk, hogy a modelleink hatékonyabbak legyenek, illetve a GPT piacra lépésével a kollégák elkezdtek azzal kísérletezni, hogy vajon tudjuk-e kombinálni a GPT technológiát a gépi fordítással, és hát egész jó eredményeket értünk el mind a két területen. Azt szeretném megemlíteni, hogy mind a két projekt mögött magyar kollégák állnak, Orevet Csaba és Tihanyi László nevét talán ismerik, ők dolgoznak ezeken a területeken. Talán később a panelben tudunk erről bőven beszélni, most nem fogok itt tovább megállni, de dolgozunk azon folyamatosan, hogy a gépi fordítás minőségét javítsuk. És a maradék 5 percben szeretnék néhány eszközt még megmutatni. Van egy olyan eszközünk, amit úgy hívunk, hogy e-summary, ezt leginkább összefoglalónak lehetne fordítani. Az eszköz is mesterséges intelligencia alapján működik, és hozzá van kötve a gépi fordításhoz. Hoztam egy magyar példát, 5 anyagot tudunk itt feltölteni, kiválaszthatjuk, hogy milyen nyelvre szeretnénk ezt az összefoglalót kérni, illetve kiválaszthatjuk, hogy milyen hosszúságú legyen. Remélhetően sikerül. Elnézést ezért a klikkelési problémákért, de nem igazán tudom, hogy hova kéne ezt irányítanom, mert most visszamegy ahelyett, hogy előre menne. Oké. Tehát itt egy angol szöveget szerettem volna magyarra és franciára összefoglalni, és meg is kaptam a rövid összefoglalómat mind a két nyelven. Ez a szolgáltatás azt tudja, hogy megvizsgálja a szövegünket, és egy algoritmus alapján egy rövid összefoglalót fog készíteni, és ez a rövid összefoglaló utána a gépi fordítás révén lesz lefordítva. A következő eszköz pedig a legújabb eszközünk, és csak sajnos ezeket végig kell klikkelnem, az e-briefing. Ugye az e-briefing, azért hoztam ezt a példát, mert itt már egy teljesen más technológiáról beszélünk. Az e-briefing az úgynevezett nagynyelvi modelleken alapul, méghozzá a GPT technológián. Ugye fontos megemlíteni, hogy nem a ChatGPT-n, hiszen ahogy néztük, ahogy megbeszéltük, a bizottság számára a biztonság nagyon-nagyon fontos, tehát természetesen semmit sem teszünk be a ChatGPT-be, viszont a modell, ami emögött áll, az a GPT modell, tehát ugyanaz a modell. Ez hasonlóan néz ki, mint az e-summary, itt is fel tudunk tölteni 5 anyagot, ki tudunk választani egy úgynevezett templétet, azok számára, akik foglalkoznak nagynyelvi modellekkel, minden bizonnyal ismerik a prompt kifejezést. Ezek a templétek úgynevezett promptok, és utána kiválaszthatjuk a nyelvet, amire szeretnénk ezt az összefoglalót, és meg fogunk kapni egy úgynevezett e-briefinget. Ugye ez megint egy olyan példa, ami a bizottságon belül nagyon-nagyon fontos felhasználási terület, hiszen gyakorlatilag mindenki politikai területen dolgozik, és hetente több száz politikai briefinget kell írnunk. Ugye ez az eszköz azt tudja, itt ahogy látják, 3 részből áll, meg fogja adni a fő politikai üzeneteket, egy úgynevezett kérdések-válaszok részt, ami leginkább akkor hasznos, hogyha mondjuk sajtótájékoztatóra készülünk, illetve fogadni egy háttér összefoglalót, és ez már teljesen a GPT technológia alapján működik. Természetesen nagyon sok biztonsági filtert tettünk bele, azért, hogy egy biztonságos outputot tudjunk kapni. Hogy néz ki mindezek után a jövő, és mik a következő lépések? Nagyon röviden. Van egy hatalmas hálózatunk a bizottságon belül, ami kifejezetten csak AI kérdésekkel foglalkozik, és az ezen a hálózaton belül végzett felmérés az azt mutatta, hogy a legnagyobb igény a szöveg és tartalom készítő eszközökre van. Ugye az e-briefing az erre volt egy példa. de a jegyzőkönyvekben, jelentések készítésében is erre nagy igény lenne, úgyhogy valószínűleg ez lesz a következő lépés, illetve az olyan általános asszisztenciát szolgáló eszközök, ami például a draftingolásban vagy helyesírásban segítene, ez is egy nagy igény, úgyhogy valószínűleg az egyik következő eszközünk egy úgynevezett e-revision lesz. Természetesen, és ezzel be is fogom fejezni, hogy időben legyünk, a nagy nyelvi modellek használata rengeteg kérdést, etikai, biztonsági kérdést felvet, ezért nagyon sok belső iránymutatás, tréning áll rendelkezésére a kollégáknak, illetve minden bizonnyal tudják, hogy európai szinten is nagyon komolyan vesszük a jogszabályzást, és március 13-án a parlament el is fogadta a mesterséges intelligenciáról szóló uniós jogszabályt. Ez hamarosan véglegesítésre kerül, és 1-2 éven belül minden tagállamnak át kell venni ezt a szabályozást. De ettől függetlenül ez továbbra is egy óriási nyitott kérdés, és azt hiszem, hogy a nagy nyelvi modellekről és azoknak a fordításon belül használatáról még nagyon sokat fogunk hallani. És ezzel el is érkeztem az utolsó szlájdomhoz. Köszönöm szépen a figyelmüket. Elnézést a klikkelés okozta megakadásokért. Ha van kérdésük, akkor a következő előadás után szívesen válaszolok, illetve itt látják a szolgáltatásom e-mail címét, ha további kérdéseik vannak, akkor írásban szívesen fogadjuk. Köszönöm szépen a figyelmüket!
Nagyon köszönjük az érdekes előadást, és külön izgalmas, hogy 21 év után sikerült Ágnest ide visszacsalni, és ez is mutatja, hogy vagy így, vagy úgy, de azért a sikeres öreg diákokat előbb-utóbb visszacsaljuk ide az FTT-re, hogy be tudjanak számolni a munkájukról, sikereikről. És hát akkor az utolsó szekciónk utolsó előadóját, Moorkens szeretném felkérni, hogy tartsa meg előadását, aki a Dublin City Egyetem Alkalmazott Nyelvek és Interkulturális Tanulmányok Intézetének docense, és ő is a fordítási minőségről fog számunkra beszélni. Köszönöm.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much to everyone from ELTE for inviting me along. I'm very pleased to follow up from Ágnes talking about AI, and from Ingemar. Both myself and Ingemar's presentation have the same conclusion, which is it depends. So if you want to just leave now, we can skip all the middle bit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about AI and about quality. There might be some crossover with previous presentations, but we'll see how it goes. There's the usual tomfoolery with this button pressing. It's magic. It's working with AI apparently. So one more. No. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to talk to you about LLMs and translation. The question at the moment is that are large language models the new state of the art? Some definitions of quality and how we might evaluate translation quality for large language models, the limits of automatic evaluation scores, what else might be important, and ethics and values, and some recent work that we've done looking at a triple bottom line for translation technology evaluation. So in my next slide, when it starts, some reasons that we're being pushed towards the use of generative AI, not just ourselves in our personal lives, but within the European Commission, as we can see, within businesses, within organizations. They're seen as the new state of the art for translation and many other tasks, or is that, at least that's the received wisdom at the moment. Slightly relatedly, that post-editing is always faster than human translation and is gradually replacing much of it. There's been lots of work, not least by Leva Mackin, and many others looking at post-editing productivity, but some recent work by Silvia Terabila over 2 years in a Swedish LSP is really interesting in showing how the productivity differs between translators and differs between language pairs. So for some language pairs, over 2.5 years, it turned out that post-editing was slower. So I do recommend her work. The likes of Sam Altman is telling us that artificial intelligence might replace all repetitive human work that doesn't involve emotional connection. Felton et al. Talked about how highly educated, highly paid white-collar occupations might be most exposed to generative AI. And there's a lot of talk about if we don't do it, then another group will. We've heard that from Emmanuel Macron when he's talking about the position of France regarding America and China and their advances in AI. And we heard it from Konstantin Dranch about 2 years ago in Translating Europe Forum. And this is all related to the hype cycle that Ingemar mentioned earlier. According to Gartner, we're at the peak of this hype cycle at the moment, and we're liable to fall into the trough of disillusionment. And as part of the Ellis Language Industry Survey last year, artificial intelligence, which had been considered an opportunity in 2022, was now perceived as a negative trend based on the amount of hype. And we find that again in the 2024 version that was just published this week. So generative tools, while they were trained on various narrow tasks like machine translation, on text summarization, on sentiment analysis, they are what OpenAI call general purpose technologies. And this reminded me of what Langdon Winner wrote back in 1978 about how technology is at its most productive when the ultimate range of results is neither foreseen nor controlled. So we're constantly finding new ways to use GPT and LLM tools, trying to figure out emergent abilities that they have. The positive side effects, they're in fact a latent expectation that's implicit in any plan for innovation, and the negative side effects are experienced as necessary evils that we're obliged to endure. And we find that more and more of these necessary evils are piling up day by day. Looking at translation, when ChatGPT first emerged, myself and my colleague Sheila Castillo looked at how well it could translate subtitles. And we found that it could translate from English to Brazilian Portuguese pretty well, but then had trouble with character limits. You'll see here, if you can read it, that it gave us a good translation, and Sheila asked how many characters there were in the segment. ChatGPT responded that there were 45 characters, including spaces, and she said, no, it has 60 characters. I apologize, you are correct. The previous sentence has 60 characters. So it's an expert on some subjects and a dilettante on others, as Cade Metz from New York Times said. It can do better on standardized tests than most people and offer precise medical advice to doctors, but it can also mess up basic arithmetic. But what people are excited about is the emergent abilities. So as these models get larger and larger, for some currently unexplained reasons, sudden abilities emerge. So we can see here from Wei et al. The ability suddenly at a certain scale to improve in the abilities for arithmetic, transliteration, question answering, grounded mappings, natural language understanding. And that's the bit that we don't currently entirely understand. In terms of translation, evaluations have said that it's very competitive with NMT for high resource languages while having limited capabilities for low resource languages. Its use across translation workflows. Pilar Sanchez-Gijon and Leira Palenzuela-Badiola found it useful for translation, post-editing, and linguistic revision, but then inconsistent for everything else. But the amount of hype is leading lots of existing products, existing companies to start to build AI into their existing tools. So we've seen the likes of MemoQ build in AI coming from ChatGPT to replace machine translation suggestions by sending a number of TM matches. They can get contextual proposals on Babel, Mighty Build and Test, Deep Dub. And over the last couple of weeks, Slater published their Language AI or 50 under 50. So these growing companies that are under 50 months old, loads of different language AI applications, localization tech using AI, AI multilingual content, AI multilingual video and audio. So it's very much the flavor of the month. And this is something that Anthony Pym, who Ingemar mentioned, warns about, that the public discourse on generative AI is so vociferous, so polarized, so ill-informed, so removed from empirical assessment that in the space of public discourse, the technology has assumed messianic or demonic proportions. with apologies to the interpreters. So how might we look to do empirical assessment for LLMs? And this is where the it depend bit comes in. A recent publication by Intento tried to compare large language models against existing NMT engines. So for this, they used the COMET automatic evaluation metric. I'll talk a little bit about COMET later, but you can see that based on this standard metric, that they found that the best performing LLMs were roughly equivalent to the best performing NMT engines. But first of all, we've got the question of the prompt. So we can have lots of different prompts with LLMs. The one that they chose to use for this is, you are a professional translator, translate the text provided by the user from source language to target language. The output should only contain the translated text. But surely the result will be variable depending on our prompt. Some people suggest that there should be iterative prompting to try and get the best result. Then we have the choice of a single evaluation metric. And while pre-trained metrics are meant to have closer, are meant to more closely match human judgment than previous string-based metrics, there are still problems with these. So you might have seen these 5 definitions of quality sometime over the last hour or so. In translation studies, we very much follow this transcendent approach, generally the idea that quality is an absolute. I won't go through the product, user-based and production-based approaches, Ingemar has already. But other considerations of quality coming from translation studies, we started with linguistic approaches back with, well, here's a picture of Ian J.C. Catford, where he was looking at linguistic approaches between one language and another. Katarina Rice with functionalist approaches, bringing in the idea of fitness for your client, for the end user. Sociological approaches, so we've got Even Zohar, Gideon Toury, bringing in the idea of history and culture. And then political and ideological approaches. I have a picture of Maria Tomáško, but also I could equally have Venuti, Gensler and others. So lots of other considerations beyond quality. It's a bit of a Venn diagram, not only how the text is chosen, but what's behind the translation. The idea that it's not just a mirror image of the source text. Another thing to consider is Christina Abdallah's suggestion of a 3D quality process, where she proposed that the product quality questioning, does the product satisfy the stated needs? That's indivisible from the process quality, how the work is done, what the source text is like, does it follow the sort of ISO standards that Ingemar was talking about, and that these are, again, indivisible from social quality, the interactions within the production network. And this affects the process quality, which in turn affects product quality. If someone is unhappy doing their work, if they're not satisfied, if they're not motivated, how will that change what they produce? So this is Ray Miyata, and he, Masaru Yamada and Kyo Kageura wrote a book about meta-language and translation. And they talked about, in the advent of NMT, how the noticeable improvement of target language fluency triggered much speculation about the future of translation, including claims that NMT would achieve human parity. In such speculation, translation performance was frequently evaluated in terms of language proficiency. Regarding translation as a linguistic operation, perhaps unconsciously, is common and persistent among NLP researchers. This is more or less the case for lay people, including clients who use translation services. So basically, we have these lots of different considerations behind translation, what represents translation quality, but we're really only looking at a very narrow definition of it in most NLP papers and in most of our published definitions of quality. I'm not going to go through this slide, which again matches with Ingemar, where Kobe et al. Brought together their 5 dimensions of quality. But you can see that this doesn't bring in these other dimensions from translation studies, the idea from Christina Abdallah, and how could you possibly even do so? So in that Intento evaluation comparing large language models and NMT, they used COMET, which is a popular current pre-trained metric for automatically evaluating translation quality. And from a paper by Ricardo Rey from last year, this is a graphic representation of the neural pre-trained metric that can give some explanations of what tokens are most important. So here we've got the noun Forschungen, but and that you can compare that potentially with human annotations, but ultimately the quality score is a value. And how do we know what's a good value, what's a bad value? And while it's trained on neural networks, the likes of Rico Senric have discovered that the same sort of weaknesses that neural networks have in terms of mistranslations, those sort of weaknesses are replicated in neural evaluation. And while Donella Meadows 20 years ago criticized our obsession with numbers, saying that it's given us the idea that what we can measure is more important than what we can't measure, you can look around and make up your own mind about whether quantity or quality is the outstanding characteristic of the world in which you live. We still do need to evaluate things, we do need to have measures, but her warning is not to maximize parts of the system or subsystems while ignoring the whole. And that's the risk with trying to evaluate LLMs, that they're so variable, there's so much behind them, there's so much to consider, that really any evaluation can only be partial. Numbers are also the basis for why they work so well. Computing, as Bruce Chaitin said, has evolved to a state of infinite complexity. It's revolutionary, it reveals a new world. Nancy Cartwright warned of the dangers of stripping away in our imagination all that's irrelevant to the concerns of the moment to focus on a single property or set of properties as if they are separate. And that's what Donella Meadows is talking about in the danger of just taking one single facet, one single method of evaluation and not trying to have a holistic rule. In terms of the use of generative AI and large language models, our universities, loads of organizations are trying to come up with sets of rules and trying to adjust them as things progress. But as Kaisa Koskinen and Annika Pokorn said, rules, they depict an ideal world, but the moral dilemmas are born of a messy and complex life. They can't possibly cover all of the possible use cases. Another problem with evaluation and the consequences of evaluation as something that was put forward by Samuel Messick, who is an educational psychologist from the 80s. And he talked about his idea of a unified concept of validity, how key issues of test validity are the meaning, relevance, and utility of scores. So when we look at those COMET scores, is that number meaningful? Is it relevant to us? How can it have utility? How will we use it? The other thing that Messick talked about were the import or value implications of scores as a basis for action. So if we're going to use that score as a basis for further action, that should change our idea of what the score means and how valid the score is. He further talks about the functional worth of scores in terms of the social consequences of their use. So if we think, for example, of Hani Hassan and others' paper talking about human parity for NMT in human translation, that was based on an automatic evaluation metric, BLEU, from what I recall. And there are loads of problems with that metric. And if we look at the social consequences were that loads of people considered that translation was a solved problem, which, as I assume everyone in the room realizes, it's not. This also comes from the reductive notions we have of automation and of AI. The common definitions we see of automation is that it's the full or partial replacement of a function previously carried out by the human operator. So this very much shows things as a binary, that it's either human or machine. And it's a zero-sum game. One's taking work from the other. Similarly, AI, thinking or behaving like humans, or thinking or behaving rationally. My colleague Sharon O'Brien, who's pictured here, calls these antagonistic dualisms that make us think of only replacement, not the idea that we can use AI to try and help us to do things that weren't possible before, to try and stretch our abilities, just rather than replace them. In AI, there's a lot of discussion of alignment, trying to align AI with human values, with human purposes. And in theory, This is from a piece by Eliezer Yudkowsky, who you might read about in this area. In the green, we see the training based on successful strategies, the extreme end, but thinkable or pragmatic. We've got those included in training, responses that are likely to be adopted. And then on the red side, this is what we're producing, a range of challenges and threats in a new paradigm, sufficient possible responses based on the training data. But practically, what we see from AI at present is, first of all, the sense that it's a bit like pre-digested food that's produced for us to easily swallow. Bernstein, quoted in Venuti, has talked about the historical movement towards uniform spelling and grammar with an ideology that emphasizes non-idiosyncratic smooth transition, elimination of awkwardness, and anything that might concentrate attention on the language itself. So it's built to be very easy, palatable. Secondly, we also see if we go on a slide, the use of reinforcement learning using human feedback. That's the bit that's followed, that's covered up by my image up at the top corner. So reinforcement learning using human feedback is the process of getting armies of workers to annotate and to try and mark the sort of output that AI companies don't want to produce, basically internalizing the rules to remove offensive, inappropriate, or culturally unacceptable content. That comes from the TAU's post-editing guidelines, but is relevant here. And there are lots of problems with reinforcement learning using human feedback. It does narrow down the scope of what's produced using large language models, but at the moment, and that's the reason for this graphic from an article called "How the AI Industry Profits from Catastrophe" by Howe and Hernandez. It means that loads of workers, generally in less developed countries than where the AI companies are headquartered, tend to be working in very poor conditions with very poor pay on annotating all of our AI materials. And just in the last week, they received, a group of them in Kenya received this on their screen when they tried to log in. They had just lost their rights to work on this material. Their jobs were over, no continued pay, no severance. So outsourcing this reinforcement learning using human feedback to less developed regions, sometimes known as AI colonialism, is a problem. The data collection and reuse, there are loads of cases at the moment for copyright abuse, how the data is collected, but loads of people have banked their believability and their public personas on the success of AI. So there's a lot of reasons why not to stop the current copyright abuses. There's worries about the concentration of power in big tech. There are worries about environmental sustainability. As far back as 2019, Emma Strubel and colleagues published a paper where they said that the average training of a large language model produced the equivalent carbon emissions of 5 cars over the 20-year lifetime of those cars. And they suggested that researchers should prioritize computationally efficient hardware and algorithms. And over time, algorithms have become more efficient, but at the same time, language models are getting larger more quickly. So we're becoming less efficient rather than more. Where training takes place, as we can see from Dimitar Sterionov and Eva van Massenhove from Tilburg's work, where training takes place makes a difference whether the origin of the power is fossil or renewable. We also should be thinking about work system sustainability, not just for the people doing annotations, but for translators working with MT or LLM output, or anyone working with AI, trying to consider what makes work satisfying, what makes work motivating. What makes work motivating usually is what's intrinsic, what makes people feel that they're contributing to a greater whole, contributing to something bigger than themselves, having supportive colleagues. But instead, we tend to focus exclusively on short-term static efficiencies like productivity and profitability, rather than the long-term dynamic efficiencies like learning and innovation. So according to Doherty et al., a work system to be sustainable needs to attain a just balance in development between all stakeholders, not just those short-term needs, but long-term as well. And that's a key part of the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 8, looking for sustained, inclusive, sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. Some work by one of my PhD students, Gökhan Firat, that he's just published in Perspectives, looks particularly at Turkish translators and their inability in many cases to get to attain many of these factors of decent work. So how might we evaluate LLMs? Some suggestions from the paper Green AI by Roy Schwartz and others is that an exclusive focus on performance has discouraged a good way for AI to develop, and they encourage a holistic approach to AI system development to consider efficiency and sustainability. But currently, these are ignored in a quest for ever greater performance, a tendency that they say pushes AI development in the wrong direction. Our own proposal from a paper that we just published in Journal of Specialized Translation is an adaptation of Elkington's triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit, calling it people, planet, and performance, with each of equal value. So people, how does this large language model impact them? Annotators, translators, platform workers, what about data dispossession? The planet, not just in terms of energy costs and CO2, but efficient models, the ICT costs of buying the equipment, where that's disposed of. A lot of that happens in third world countries, and not with very safe circumstances. And then performances, which should be task appropriate using comprehensive standards such as the one that Ingemar spoke about earlier. For us personally, there are lots of suggestions that we might use AI during our own work, during our own lives. Ethan Mollick has suggested this sort of division of our work into task categories, things we just want to do ourselves, things we can delegate to AI with oversight, centaur tasks, things that we can do in collaboration with AI, and things that we can completely automate. But that also has to be kept in line with the concerns that we might have, that others have, about the use of AI. Myself and my colleague Isabel Rivas-Chinel are currently surveying translators about how they feel about AI. And of 194 respondents so far, there's a lot of concern about the effect on rates, remuneration and labor costs, the use of technology to cut them, the future of the market, the use of technology to constrain creativity, reputational and legal risks due to ChatGPT's mistakes, and the intentions of people behind these tools. Also, if we're using these tools ourselves, we might consider that it's not all these large language models. There are small language models too. There are open source language models. So this grid shows us that we can have a small language model that is held locally, that can perform well on a small number of specific tasks with little environmental impact. We don't necessarily have to go for the full closed source large language model that's maximized for performance on a wide range of tasks. Environmental impact is high, this and training data and the true costs are hidden. We can actually go for something that's a little bit more variable and have it under our own control. And actually, in a book that we're about to publish, we've also included a generative AI toolkit. So you can create your own MLLM. So while that book is closed source, this toolkit is open source. And if you want to take the URL down, it's available now if you want to create your own multilingual large language model. But I have 2 minutes left, so I better close. So in closing, contemporary automated measures of quality, they're better than previous, but they lack many, many dimensions. We have lots of dimensions of quality. There are lots of different types of things we can do with large language models, but there are lots of different types of language models that we can use. It's hugely variable. Generative AI based on large language models, they've got impressive abilities, particularly at scale, but it's more important than ever for us to think beyond only performance. They might be useful in our own work, but we might want to use smaller rather than large language models and consider how these fit with our own personal values and our own personal sense of ethics. And if you want to take part in our survey, please feel free to follow this QR code. And thank you very much.
Köszönjük az előadást, és akkor elérkezett a kérdések ideje. Most lehetne kérdéseket feltenni a 3 előadónknak. És akkor itt a segédem viszi majd a mikrofont. Vannak-e kérdések? Igen.
Köszönöm szépen. Én Farkas Ágnestől szeretném kérdezni, hogy úgy érzem, hogy a végén nem volt elég idő arra, hogy az e-summary és az e-briefing közötti különbségekre kitérjünk, hogy esetleg erről tudnál egy kicsit többet mondani.
Nagyon szívesen. Köszönöm, hogy kaptam egy extra percet vagy 2. Hátrafordulok, hogy lássanak. Tehát az alapvető különbség az, hogy az e-briefing az már a nagy nyelvi modelleken alapul, tehát ezen a GPT technológián, de felhasználói szempontból az az, hogy befolyásolni tudjuk az outputot. Ugye erre nem volt időm, hogy ezt elmagyarázzam. Volt a képernyő bal felső részén egy része, ahol be lehet írni kulcsszavakat, illetve kérdéseket, és ezzel egy kicsit irányítani tudjuk, hogy milyen outputot fogunk kapni. Míg az e-summary-nél ez egy teljesen mechanikus folyamat, tehát az algoritmus fogja eldönteni, hogy mi az, ami legfontosabb a szövegben, és úgy kapod meg az összefoglalót. Tehát egy mondatban az e-briefingnél felhasználjuk ezt a lehetőséget, hogy tudunk beszélgetni a GPT technológiával, viszont korlátozzuk azáltal, hogy csak azokat a templéteket lehet használni, amiket mi írtunk, tehát azokat a promptokat, illetve ebbe a promptba az is benne van, hogy nem használhat saját információt, tehát csak azt az információt fogja használni, amit te feltöltöttél, viszont a kérdéseiddel irányíthatod, hogy milyen outputot kapsz.
Köszönjük szépen. További kérdések? Addig, amíg akkor esetleg... Ja, itt jön egy kérdés.
Thank you very much. Can I put my question in English?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank you very much for the last really extremely interesting and important talk, and also paying attention to these ethical questions according to the AI technology. I have a technical question. Do you know about projects or research focusing on standardizing the prompts for the GPT technology and giving prompts according to, for example, the standardized the norm on standardizing the translation tasks that could give better results by using the technology? And do you think this will be the future to use the GPT technology for translation?
Thanks very much. So far I've only seen blog posts as opposed to any research of any scale looking at prompts. And a lot of it has been to do with multi-part prompts. So trying to have prompts that have maybe 6 different sentences, each with a slightly different purpose to adjust the output. And I don't know if there's any standard to those, because I don't know if these are effective when there's retrainings, but that's all I'm aware of so far. Whether it will be the future, I mean, I suppose it will depend on the purpose, and it'll depend on the language pair. And the fact that 9-figure sums have been spent on training GPT-4 means that at the moment, when we use those tools, they're artificially cheap because of the amount of money being put into them. If we were paying the actual amount it costs for training, and presumably at some point we'll have to pay these actual costs, then things will perhaps change. But at the moment, I think it works out cheaper to use a large language model than it does to use many commercial MT systems. So at the moment, if the prices were to stay as they are, it could become the state of the art for many well-resourced language pairs. But surely the prices can't stay artificially low, so that is likely to change.
Thank you. További kérdések előadókhoz? És akkor nekem lenne itt még egy kérdésem, szintén Joss Moorkenshez. Egy korábbi konferenciánkon felmerült a prompt designer szerep, ami itt tehát a prompt designer szerep egy korábbi konferenciánkon felmerült, mint a nyelvi közvetítők egy újabb szerepe, hogy a promptokkal fordítani. És vajon a prompt designernek a kompetenciái ebben a szerepben vajon hogyan fognak a fordító kompetenciáihoz hasonlítani? Szükség lesz-e fordítói kompetenciára, hogy valaki úgy tudjon promptolni, hogy jó fordítást állítson elő a gép?
I think we need translator competences to be able to recognize translation quality. And in work I've done with Felix de Carmo, it appears that maybe those translator competences are more important for NMT post-editing than they might have been for SMT, partially because of what Ingemar mentioned about the fact that maybe he was in conversation that the errors jump out at you in SMT and don't in NMT, and that programming for fluency is even more noticeable with the output of LLMs. In the survey we're doing at the moment, it was interesting that there were two main types of extra training that our respondents mentioned taking over the last number of months. One was to do with how large language models work and how they might incorporate. And then the second one was to do with prompt engineering. So certainly it seems that and that was out of 194, I think it was around 40 of them said that they'd been doing tests or doing training in prompt engineering. So it's something translators are looking into. I wouldn't claim to be a huge expert in prompt engineering, so I can't say any more on the topic. Thanks for the question.
Maybe this will be something for the future, for future research. Thank you. Köszönjük szépen. Nem tudom, van-e esetleg egy utolsó kérdésre? Akkor engednék mindenkit a kávészünetre. Közben itt előkészültünk a kávészünetre, és a kávészünet után kerekasztal-beszélgetéssel folytatjuk, tehát lehet majd további válaszokat, további gondolatokat hallani az előadóinktól. Köszönjük szépen, és kellemes kávészünetet, beszélgetést kívánok mindenkinek.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, the language of this session is going to be English. And we will give you some space for questions in the end. So if you want to ask questions after this discussion, then you may ask them in Hungarian, but for the rest we decided to stick to English so that you don't have to wear your headsets. Welcome again, and thank you very much for accepting the invitation to take part in this panel discussion on the future of translators. Firstly, I'd like to invite each of you to introduce yourselves briefly and share your connection to the translation profession. And over the next hour, I will present some prompts related to the topic, and you are encouraged to reflect on those that resonate with you. Okay, you don't have to react to all of them at all. And I have 11 topics prepared, but first thing first, please introduce yourselves. Liva, can I ask you to start? We have some mobile microphones on the table.
Hello, for those of you who were here on Wednesday, I think, I gave a lecture. I'm Lieve Makke, I'm professor in translation technology at Ghent University, and I teach already to Bachelor 2 students what translation technology is. I give a course on machine translation and post-editing. And I also doing a lot of research and supervising PhD students working on translation quality assessment, the differences between post-editing, normal translation, all these kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. Ági, can I ask you to be the second one?
Good afternoon. So I'm Farkas Ágnes still. And I'll be very brief because I've already explained. So I work in DG Translation. I'm the head of an advisory service for AI-based tools in the Commission. And my connection to translation started here in ELTE. So I started here as a French translator and interpreter. And right after my studies, I went to the European Commission, where first I was a translator, then I was the head of one of the Hungarian translation units, and later I went to policy, and after a, let's say, long couple of years in policy, 2 years ago, I went to the machine translation sector, and as I said, I'm heading now this advisory service for our clients.
Thank you very much. Can we continue with Ingemar, please?
Yes, Ingemar Strandvik. I'm currently working in DGT as a quality manager, which means coordinating quality-related work to quite some extent, since we are 24 languages doing the same thing. It's about eliciting best practices and developing guidelines, etc. I formerly worked as a translator in DGT, and I also have a background in Sweden. Before I joined the Commission, I'm a trained court interpreter, and also I have a degree in translation, which are two different programs in Sweden. And I worked as a state authorized sworn legal translator for 12 years in Sweden, and also as a court interpreter. And I participated in a huge dictionary project, lexicographical project. And I was also teaching at Stockholm University in the Spanish translation program, and that's about it, I think.
Thank you very much. Can we continue with you?
Hi again. So I'm Joss. I'm an associate professor in translation studies in Dublin City University, where I went for my undergraduate degree in Japanese and translation, and then did a PhD in translation technology and clung on as a postdoc through a number of EU-funded projects. I've been a faculty member for about 8 years, and my research is mostly on various ways of interaction of translators and technology.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, my colleague Szilárd.
Good afternoon. My name is Szilárd Szlavik. I work here at ELTE for the Department of Translation and Interpreting, and at the same time I'm a PhD student, and my main research area is post-editing.
Thank you very much. My name is Réka Eszenyi, and I'm a lecturer and a researcher at ELTE FTT, and I'm trying to explain why I'm moderating this session and not someone else. Last year, my university let me go on a sabbatical, and I wrote a book on the human translator and machine translation. And this book is about the changes in the role of the translator, and I focused on the past 10 years, so those changes that happened. And as part of this research project, I conducted an interview study with translators from different sectors, EU, company, freelance. There are no sworn translators in Hungary, so they were left out of the picture, unfortunately. And out of these interviews, some motifs emerged. These were things I did not ask them about. We were just talking about their past, present, future, and these were the motifs that came up the most frequently. And as the title of this panel discussion, we deliberately chose a provoking title. This is a question that was the most frequently asked in the past couple of years at translation conferences. It is, of course, not posed by translation scholars, but mostly by freelancers and users of translators, and sometimes also trainers. So that's a kind of explanation and background to the title of the panel. With the rise of neural machine translation, ChatGPT, and similar AI-based services, the translator's profession and future vision has changed radically. I think we can say that. And many colleagues wonder whether these will lead to the eventual dusk of the translation profession. So I'm going to list a number of motifs. I have 11. I would love to get to number 11 in the end, because that's the most provoking, or that's the strangest one for all of us, I think. So I will just start with the motifs, okay? And if you feel like reacting to these or reflecting on them, then please let us know and we will listen to you, but you do not have to react to all of them, okay? The first one is, and this was the most frequently mentioned by the participant translators, is translation quality. So what are your thoughts on this in the light of the technological tools available? And before I give you the floor, I'd like to say that if you feel like repeating anything you have just said in the previous sections, I think that's okay. I think that's very useful. So who would like to start? Any thoughts on translation quality?
2 words, it depends.
2 words, it depends, okay. Thank you.
I would like to repeat partly what I said before, but more briefly. I think the question is wrongly put. I mean, not the question, but the thinking in tools are tools. What matters are the specifications and the quality requirement, and then there shouldn't be. If we get rid of the hype, and if we take it down to what actually works, translators are happy to work with new tools, and the fact that the nature of the work changes doesn't necessarily have to lead to a disaster. What matters is what people like Orlo Mel talks about, the augmented translation. That, you know, as long as we have the experts in the loop, I don't think that this should be the end. But maybe this is overly optimistic. I don't know what my colleagues say.
Can I just react to this very briefly? Translation quality did not just mean in these narratives that it's all going down. For some of them, it was going up because of these tools. Any other reflections on translation quality, Agi?
Yeah, maybe just to say that for me, and as my perspective is from machine translation, as a machine translation expert, for me, quality is not the first thing that comes to mind. For me, the benefit of machine translation is time and availability. And as I explained in my presentation, for us in the European Commission, it's very clear that we do need human translators, and at least right now, machine translation is not replacing human translators. Now, about the future, it's quite difficult to predict, because we also see with the large language models that they are extremely powerful. And within the machine translation sector, we are also experimenting with combining fuzzy matches and GPT technology. And the first results are very good. And I think, Joss, you also mentioned your research in this area. So it's impossible to tell what the future will bring. But as it stands right now, for me, it's very clear machine translation is not there to replace human translation. But as Ingemar said, it's a tool that we can use, and it will just give us more time to fine-tune our translations. So I don't see this as a danger at all right now, and I see it as a tool that helps us in our work.
Thank you. Anything else on translation quality at this point? If not, then the second motif often cited was time, or the speed of work, and this was speeding up or the acceleration. Any thoughts on this? Yes.
Maybe I can go back to a study I did with Daniel Prue on at DGT, and we really were looking at all the segments and the time. It took us a long time because we had to process all these XLIF files, but we were really comparing the segments that were translated just by Scratch with the ones that were translated by the help of MT. And in fact, if you just look at these segments, because there is where you have your profit of your MT, it was only 15% of additional time that you gain. So it's not that much. It's definitely not that much. And I recently, my colleague is doing a study with literary translations, and I asked her yesterday to give me the numbers for today. It's a bit the same. So it's not that much. Most of the time gain comes from that you have to do less typing, but typing is only part of it. And this was only looking at the segments, the translation of the segment, but you have a lot of other tasks. You have to read the text, you have to do, you have to look up resources, and this was not included. So in the overall tasks, it's even less. And then maybe another thing that we noticed that was, okay, you can have very perfect machine translations. they're perfect. You have nothing to, you don't have to change anything to them, but you have to read them and you have to approve them. And this is also taking time. You can't compress this anymore. So it really depends. If you really want high quality, yes, you have some speed up, and yeah, I think you gain time in typing effort, but it's a small part of your job.
Thank you. Indeed, typing was often mentioned, getting rid of typing. Any other reflections on time? Yes, please.
So I don't know why I'm testing it when Leva has just spoken. No, you never know.
We'll have people yelling and screaming if it doesn't.
So from people I've read about and spoken to from the industry, the watchword is velocity more than trying to cut costs. The efforts to try and bring in technology are very much trying to speed things up. And we can see that in audiovisual translation with the tendency to chop pieces of programming up into small chunks, distribute those for a 2-hour turnaround for subtitling, then a project manager quickly pulls them together, does a quick check, and then that's sent out. And the idea is that's meant to circumvent piracy. And that was a fast turnaround effort that was developed by Iuno Media. Previously, it had been a 4-hour turnaround. Theirs was a 2-hour turnaround. They've now merged with SCI to form the largest audiovisual translation company. And this is very much a standard. Once things are translated into English, so this would happen, for example, from premium Korean dramas. And once they're translated into English, this becomes the pivot version, the template from which all others are created. And one, of course, the rationalization means that once it's subtitled and translated once, it won't be subtitled and translated a second time. So whatever quality we have from this quick 2-hour turnaround, that's what we'll have for all other languages. And it doesn't matter whether there's certain elements of the subtitles that are lost in English. Maybe it might be something to do with gender that's not important. That's still the pivot from which all those others are created. So there are repercussions sometimes for these attempts to focus on speed. One other comment, and I mentioned Silvia Terabila's work. I was examining her PhD 2 weeks ago, and it was really interesting to see that our assumption that post-editing is always faster isn't necessarily the case. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes slower, especially for English Swedish. But also interesting was that there tended to be less effort putting into revision for post-editing because there seemed to be an assumption that the quality requirements were lower when MT was the initial basis. And she didn't have a way of backing this up, but she just thought it was curious that these revision times were lower, but the quality wasn't noticeably different, or maybe was maybe a little bit lower in terms of errors than human translation, but all pretty close. But yeah, it was an interesting observation. So sometimes these efforts to speed up quality, they're a little short-sighted, or sorry, speed up translation are a little bit short-sighted, but that seems to be a real focus from the industry. Velocity is a major watchword.
Thank you. Szilárd?
Maybe just one point to speed, sorry. So if you want to post-edit a text and you just read it, I think in most of the cases you can say, well, it's not bad. And if you really want to find every single errors, every single mistakes in the translation, you really need to check the source and target text word by word and sentence by sentence, because the problems are hidden, so really well hidden. It's not like translation from our students or from a translator. They're just different, and it's more time to find these.
Okay, thank you. Ingemar?
Can I add to that it's really a matter of risk management, in the sense that if your risk tolerance is low, it's often described as the poison cookie syndrome. So you have a box of cookies, and you know that there are 2 that are poisonous. And even if most looks very good, if the error tolerance is extremely low, you have to go through everything because you don't know where these poison cookies are, and that's what you were referring to. That, you know, so it's complex, and I would argue for what the stuff that we are doing in DGT, translation of legislation, binding legislation, not just for information, but legislation that is the law in the different official languages. Such translation, of course, we could do machine translation in 1 second and we would get everything, but you have to understand the process, how you, when you draft legislation in one language, you don't start from scratch. You go to reference documents and you pick specific references or formulations and terms from specific documents. And when you translate this, you proceed in the same way. You do not just go to a large language model and take whatever could be a proper translation. You have to proceed in the same way and go and pick specific formulations from specific documents. And this makes it very difficult. And therefore, it's so important to focus on use cases when we discuss these things, so that we don't compare apples with pears, and have a clear idea of this. Thank you.
Thank you. The third one is remuneration. Any thoughts on remuneration? What you can earn with translation? In the narratives, some of the colleagues who have been translating for a very long time mentioned that at the beginning, when clients didn't know that much about neural machine translation, and of course we are talking about translators into Hungarian, which did not work very well with machine translation in the beginning, then this was very beneficial for them. And then of course now it's all turning and the situation is changing, and they worry a lot about the future. Any thoughts on this part? I know it's, especially if you're not a freelance translator, it's very difficult to connect to this. Yeah.
I always find it extremely strange that I have to pay my plumber per hour and that the translator just gets paid per word or get 10 discounts for quality that you don't know beforehand. So it's a matter of trust. I was discussing this with Sonia this morning while we were walking, and she said maybe it's because these plumbers are men and most of the freelance translators are women, and they don't stand up and they just ask what they're worth for. I'm not sure, but there's such a huge volume of things that needs to be translated. I don't think I think we will still need human translators, but I think they shouldn't work below certain thresholds. Right?
Thank you.
So there's a couple of different models for payment. There's the model for payment based on the amount of technical effort, the sort of keystrokes that are expended. That doesn't tend to correlate with the amount of time spent and aren't always accurate. Often those measures are based on the starting and ending and don't really take into account the fact that there are things that people might type, then remove, then try something else. So they're not necessarily accurate. I know some LSPs offer payment based on those. There's payment based on time, as Leva mentioned, but some translators, including ones that I work with, are very unhappy with that idea because they have a per word rate and they've built up translation memories, they've built up resources, they've built up speed, and they feel that they can do more per hour, and that's a value that they have added. So they would rather be paid per word. But on average, based on, I mentioned Gökhan Firat, our PhD student in Surrey, he's done a survey looking at decent work standards, including payment globally. So we've just published this article based on Turkish translators, but his work is global for his entire PhD, and the results are really stark. That there are people who are translating full time and are really earning a pittance, and it's an absolute disgrace. The assumption, I don't know how it can be possibly justified by people who are paying translators very, very low rates. there's an assumption that if you don't do it, someone else will come along and do it. And that's been proven to be false by what's been known as the talent crunch in audiovisual translation, because they couldn't get enough people to do these low paid jobs. I'm not sure what the solution is, because so often we see technology being used as an excuse to cut labor costs. While today and in articles I've advocated this more of a long-term view, trying to retain relationships with translators, but it seems to be falling on deaf ears. I don't know, whether to what extent any publications are really read and taken into account, but it's certainly the results of Gökhan's work are stark and quite shocking.
Thank you. The fourth point is a bit happier, digital bliss. This is a term a Korean professor gave us at a LITHMI conference. And she was talking about people being very happy with the fact that they can use these technological tools, and it makes their work faster, more interesting. There were even narratives describing a burnout which was turned back by neural machine translation. Have you ever experienced or seen digital bliss? Have you heard this from colleagues? Any thoughts on this? Agi?
Yeah, I have some comments on this, not necessarily connected to translation, but you might remember the tools that we showed, and this last one, the e-briefing. So this was a response to a real need within the Commission, a digital tool that can give a very good start for the drafting process, and we have extremely good feedback. So we see that the policy officers who are overloaded with work and they draft these tons of policy briefings every week, for them it's a huge help. And this is something that can be measured in, if not happiness, but definitely, joy, because you have a very good first start, and then you have more time also on fine-tuning, because this is also a problem for us, is that we just don't have enough time to prepare a good piece of work. So whatever can help to have a first of a good quality start, it's very important for us. And it's been there now for 2 months. Feedback is very good, and I think this is something that you could qualify as a digital bliss, very nice term, so I might use this in the future. So this is not strictly speaking translation related, but as an AI-based tool, it's really something that brings a plus in our daily work.
Thank you. Yesterday we had an excellent lecture by a Slovak colleague, Klaudia Bednárová-Gibová, on happiness at work and translator happiness. And she mentioned terms like linguistic hedonism. So this is the direction we're talking about. Any other thoughts on digital bliss?
I recall that one of colleagues, a Hungarian colleague, said there were also psychological benefits of starting from empty, so that you don't have to start from an empty page and that you thought, okay, the work is already half done. Because, when you're translating, it's also kind of lonely job, and that you feel you get some help from a machine.
Indeed, thank you.
I would expand the concept not just to machine translation, but we have so many colleagues who are so extremely proficient in the use of CAT tools. Advanced use of CAT tools, and all sorts of applications that the colleagues develop. And somebody's spying, and it's really amazing to see how you can transform 200 pages into 30 pages by doing intelligent use iterations of CAT tools, and it requires some upskilling for those who aren't really. But those who are on top of this, I really I understand the concept, and then I also think that it's a natural. Now, of course, with the speed of the technological development, it is more acute than it was before. But I remember when I arrived in DGT 25 years ago, it was just when we started. I was shocked to see that people were dictating. And I had been brought up with computers and text processing, etc. And And we introduced Translators Workbench, which was the top-notch thing at the time. And you would have these older colleagues who refused to do this, and nobody would stop them because they were doing like 25 pages a day, dictating. And so there's also this generational thing that it's normal that there is a resistance when people are older and have been working all the time, but young people, it's like with mobiles and children today. I would be very surprised if translation students today are reluctant to use tools. It's a natural thing, I think.
Thank you. Although digital bliss was mentioned by translators in their 50s and 60s. That's very interesting. Yeah. The fifth point is the boundaries of the translation profession and training. Any thoughts on this?
I just would like to refer to Edina's question on prompt engineering. In my experience, so our advisory service is within an IT unit. It's a very big unit. We are basically the only unit right now that can still recruit, which is not necessarily a positive thing because we would need to recruit translators as well. But we do receive stuff. And the profile that we are looking for, it's always with translation background, but prompt engineering is something that's becoming extremely important. So I think that as for the boundaries of translation profession, upskilling is extremely important, and to be open and just look around a little bit what are the current needs in the translation and language profession. Because there's this combination of IT and being a professional translator or even interpreter, because technology is also there. That's very much needed, at least in the European Commission. So I would say upskilling is extremely important. For me, the boundaries or limits of language professions are very fluid nowadays.
Thank you.
We have been thinking about the same problem at Ghent University as well, especially because the language profiles are, there are not that many students choosing for languages anymore. And we start next year in the first bachelor with a new combination that they choose one foreign language and language technology. So we are looking forwards and training these profiles because I think they will become extremely useful in the future.
One thing that we find with our graduates is that from our master's programs, probably about 70% of them don't become translators. They go in, many of them go into the language industry. They maybe make decisions about what workflows to use for translation. They become localization engineers. It being Dublin, many of them go into big tech. So we have people who go to Google, to Facebook. They go to startups, some of which are very interesting, and often these startups haven't really thought about translation or localization, so they can really add value there. But speaking to other members of the EMT network, I think it's quite common that the minority become translators. And I suppose for us, it's not a problem as long as they're leaving being useful and having jobs that they feel are worthwhile and valued. But I might ask you the question if it's the same here, and maybe what you were getting at with this boundaries of the profession point.
Yeah, we can see the boundaries shifting, of course, and we are offering new courses and specializations like translation technologist and similar subjects to make sure that when our students, apply for a job at a translation agency, when they have to, show how fast they are and how handy they are with tech tools, then they perform well. But of course, another question is if students want to do this. I think I think this profile of the translator is very much shifting, and you have to be tech savvy to enjoy it, which kind of brings us to effort. When I started translation, it was a huge effort. I worked mostly from Dutch into Hungarian and the other way around with dictionaries. So it took days to do something, and it took a lot of concentration, which has changed, of course. So how do you see effort and translator and the translator's profile? Should it be someone who can concentrate for a long time in a darkened room, or is it becoming somebody who can switch quickly between different activities? Any thoughts on this, or any kind of experience as a translator?
It's rather a comment. And just referring to what you said, Rika, so when I started as a translator many years ago, like 20 years ago, indeed it was pretty much the same. But for me, that was also the beauty of the profession. You know, these long hours of spending and trying to find the best solution. And I'm just wondering that if today it becomes just a click, that is that beauty of the profession. Now, in terms of efficiency, that was your question, right? So efficiency, effort, yeah. Yeah, maybe it requires less effort, although when I listen to Szilárd or also to you, when you say that what you can gain is only 15% of your time, then I'm not convinced. So ideally, these tools should help you with your efforts and should make you more, you know, make you be able to do more. But in terms of this beauty of the profession and the you know, this job satisfaction, I'm not sure that it's a good thing. But this is just a, you know, reflection on the profession itself. It's not, strictly speaking, maybe a reply to your question. But maybe, Jos, you have something to add, or also some philosophical.
It's an interesting point, though, because Claudia said yesterday that the happiest translators are literary translators who make the most effort, I think. Yes.
In a study we did with a language service provider in the UK, the owner said that she and her employees could work if they were just translating for 11 hours, but if they were post-editing, they were exhausted after 8 hours. But I don't think there's such a clear differentiation most of the time these days, because Michael Farrell, who is a translator, he created IntelliWeb? No. Oh, I've forgotten his tool. Anyway, he's a translator and teacher in Milan. He recently did a survey where most of the people were doing what he called hybrid post-editing, so working within a CAT tool, getting a number of different inputs, of which MT was just one. So actually maybe that division between post-editing and translating regularly is somewhat artificial. But one thing that came up from Fair Work, who are a group based in Oxford, so it was from the ESIST survey last year, looking at people who work on digital platforms, is that a lot of effort has to be put into searching for jobs within these platforms. So increasingly translators are working within these closed digital environments. Some of them have automatic job allocation, but a lot of them have either first person to jump for a job gets it, or you can spend a lot of time trawling around. And they were spending upwards of 20% of their time searching for jobs, doing unpaid work. So that seems to be a lot of wasted effort, which is rather an unfortunate development.
Effort. Yeah, indeed. Thank you. That brings us to, yes?
I think it also depends on the personality, what you consider as the beauty of the job. For me, personally, I really like clicking. So I like to have many tools. But yeah, I completely agree that there are some translators who really don't want to use so many CAT tools, so many AI, but there are also many who do. So maybe we lose some people on one side, but win others on the other side.
Thank you. It kind of brings us to tools and also ChatGPT and similar AI-based applications. Any comments, anything you'd like to repeat, or any new reflections in that area? So I did not ask my translators about tools, but they kept talking about them, of course, about the frustration of how complicated a cat tool can be, and digital bliss and all those things. They all connected to tools. Even when you don't ask them, it's all over the place. I actually made longer versions of my prompts, relying on ChatGPT. So I'm just going to share the longer version ChatGPT made. How do you see the role of translation tools evolving in the future?
I'll speak. So I think the first question is, what do you mean by translation tools? Because CAT tools are an integrated part of the profession. Machine translation is also nowadays. Just an example, we had our staff meeting in the Commission in DG Translation, and usually this is a forum where there's a lot of criticism, and the last years there was always some criticism about machine translation, but not this year. So it also shows that it kind of became part of the profession. Now, if you talk about large language models and GPT, that's a totally new area. And here I can just repeat myself, but I guess you as well in Dublin University, you're experimenting with how to use GPT technology to help machine translation. So we have something that we call LLM enhanced machine translation, and our first results are quite good. I didn't have time to explain this during the presentation, but we actually discussed in the coffee break. Our first results are really good for all the EU official language pairs from English into all these 24 language pairs. What we see is that on 40, I don't know what happened. I have a problem with technology, it seems, and clicking.
It's working.
Clicking is my enemy. Okay, so so on 40% of the test text, we see something like, for those of you who are familiar with the blue scores, between 8 and 10 points more. So this is quite promising. So what we think, if we can combine this with neuro-machine translation, we could actually have better neuro-machine translation results. And as you could also see, it's also something that we use for other AI-based tools, and for us, this is definitely the future. Having said this, we need to bear in mind that the use of large language models comes with a lot of ethical problems as well, as just mentioned, and this is also something that the European Commission takes very seriously. So it's kind of impossible to tell what will happen in the future, because there's still a lot of concerns about copyright and data protection, and when we work with large language models, these risks are always there. So yeah, just not a very short reflection on this.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
We have in Belgium a very large Facebook group, Kent Vertaald it's called, where there's a lot of freelance translators, and they really complain a lot about just the packages that you receive for Trados that are impossible to import. So these things, it's not related to machine translation, but just to the CAT tool itself. But they do cause a lot of frustration. Yeah.
I have to confess that the lady who mentioned digital bliss at that conference in Leeuwarden also mentioned digital trouble. And it's certainly there. Anything else?
There's another colleague, Gökhan Dugru, who has his term is technological inflation, for the number of new tools we're constantly having to learn and add to our suite of technology that we regularly use. And on the comment of where translation technology is going, it seemed for a while that there was an increased focus on usability. I remember from Alina Lagudaki's survey in the mid-2000s, she said that end users' requirements were not that important. It was very much seen as an engineering problem in the development of CAT tools at the time. But it seemed that there was a renewed focus on end users, and tools became far more usable during the 2000s. And I wonder if things are regressing a little at the moment, where we have more and more digital platforms that are closed and made available only to workers within specific organizations. Sometimes these are based on commercial CAT tools and they have some sort of deal with them, but other times they're developed within this organization and don't have the same elements of usability and control that translators might be used to in their regular commercial tools.
Thank you. And moving on to new areas, appreciation. We very often hear from people, you know, just laymen who use neural machine translation that we will not need translators in the future. Also, we've been talking about problems of remuneration. How do you see these trends? We had a PhD student who wrote a wonderful thesis on the status and prestige of interpreters. First, she wanted to investigate translators and interpreters, but that study also made it obvious that well, we have a lot to catch up on, but I don't think that these technological trends are really helping us in this. So how do you see this, or how is this working in your country? I could also mention the Dam and Zetsen's studies from Denmark, who they worked on status and prestige of translators. That was, of course, before the neurological turn. So where is this developing? Will there be translators, you know, knowledge workers who have expertise of these tools, while others are not able to produce professional translations, or where do you think this will develop?
I think the widespread use of Google Translate has a very negative impact on overall perception, because it's so easy.
We have no sound. Nincs hang.
It's too close. Okay. I have two.
Can you please start again?
Yeah, I forgot
Google
what I was
Translate.
saying. Yeah, the widespread use of Google Translate by a community that's not aware of what translation quality is. You just click and you get a translation that's good enough in their opinion. This is harmful for the profession, I think. I just received an email, I think a month ago, from a colleague of mine who's a professor at the University of Amsterdam. And he just asked me, Lieve, what's your opinion? Should I hire a professional translator to have something translated for a website of the university? I said, if you think it's your visibility of your university, if you take it seriously, yes, of course. I wouldn't trust a machine translation, even if it's correct. I want someone human to have a look at it, but it's a perception that it's easy and that it's going well. Because it's that fluent, the translations, you don't see the errors.
Thank you.
I don't know, but from my 30-something years of professional practice, I have always had this lack of appreciation, and I think it has always been the case. When I started, it was like, yeah, we have a secretary, your father is from whatever country, so can you please translate this? I mean, the lack of awareness of what professional translation involves and the need for it, I think it has always been there. Now the technological turn, of course, changes how this manifests itself, but in my experience, it has always, it's a constant and eternal struggle for us to argue our case and justify our existence. And in a way, I'm wondering, the questions we started with, isn't the real problem the fact that translator competence is the key competence in all this? And without translator competence, you go nowhere. And now, of course, today you need a lot of technological competence as well. But the real problem is that very skilled translators, experienced translators, they don't have a problem. They are super specialized and they just benefit from all these tools. The challenge is for new graduated translators to get the experience you need to become a good translator, because the tools have become so good that they are as good as mediocre translators. I'm asking, but that's at least the way I see it. So that's the real challenge with all this, how to, and also what I hear from universities all over the place is that it's difficult to recruit students. Translation programs close down because there is this hype perception that the translation problem has been solved and it's difficult to recruit people. And so the worst case scenario is a situation where there will be no more skilled people who have the competence to determine whether the quality is good or bad, and where what you get is, this is the translation, and you don't have the competence. So yeah, maybe not entirely to the point, but
I think it was absolutely relevant what you said. Any other thoughts on this?
Just the fact that LLMs and generative AI tools mean the sort of concerns we might have had just for translation to do with NMT are now the problem of a lot more people than they used to be. And in some cases, it means that the sheer obviousness of the problem, like ignoring of copyright, the fact that websites are just trawled for training data, that means that there are now legal cases because this has become, such a big deal, whereas when it was just for translation, no one cared that much. So, it could mean more roles and professions and occupations become devalued, but it could also prompt a bit of a discussion about what's important, where the risks lie.
I would add to that for many years, when AI was mainly something that translators were acquainted with the neural machine translation and machine learning, etc., we struggled against the hype. And please take it down to some reality. Now, thanks to ChatGPT, as you say, the entire society is confronted with the reliability issues of AI. And I think this is very positive for us because it's not that the translators are against the technological development. It's just that it's a kind of reality check, thanks to the fact that it is being spread in the entire society.
Just a very short addition to that. I was thinking while I was listening to you that since translation is demand-driven, it's also about educating our clients and so that they know what you can get from machine translation or large language models and what you can't. And for us in the Commission, it's an important part of my job as part of the promotion to explain what it can do and also to manage expectations. And as Ingemar said, I think the fact that large language models are widely available and people are becoming aware of these kind of problems, copyright, data protection, might also help with the appreciation of translation profession, hopefully.
And that's, I forgot to mention that precisely in the Commission, DGT has now taken the lead for the entire Commission. So the translator competence in this domain is now paying off and is being appreciated in all services, which is also a positive note in this.
Thank you. We have reached point 10, which is unofficial translation. I have absolutely overstated your study with Felix do Carmo in my book on this, because this is not mentioned so often, or at that point it was very rare to find in articles. But several interviewees described this situation of, I'm using NMT and it's faster and my work is easier and I can earn more money, but I can't talk about this to my client. Or from language service providers, NMT is forbidden, DeepL is forbidden, but we can still see that our translators are using it because there's this terminology which is inconsistent, and all these points. And also in our courses, there's a lot of unofficial translation we are trying to get around, but nowadays, if you give homework, it will end up in DeepL or some other tool. So what are your thoughts on this? You can't stop it, you can't forbid it. You can, of course, have ethical codes. You can expect these things from your translators. Joss?
Our view is that knowledge is power, so trying to teach them what's behind the tools, where it's appropriate to use them and not to use them inappropriately, including for their homework. But there was a study presented a couple of years ago by Elizabeth Marshman from the University of Ottawa, and this was to do with the Canadian translation, it's not association, the like official translation, that's the service, the translation service. And this was to do with whether they would build their own machine translation system. It was highly controversial, and there were questions about it in Parliament in Canada. Eventually they created a machine translation system, but you couldn't copy and paste from it. You could only use it as a source of ideas. But at around the same time, they also discovered that there were 1 million hits per week from the translation service to Google Translate. So there was this unofficial translation going on that no one was willing to admit about, that they were doing it or who was doing it. It just happened.
Any other thoughts on unofficial translation? If no, then I'm not getting to the disappearance of the translator. I just use this in the title to make it sensational, like what you were showing, Agi, who's killing EU translators. Unless you insist on saying anything about this. I think you've said it all. And I'm turning to the audience now. Any questions, reflections from your side? I can see 2 hands. Ines is going to, can we just, yeah. I think I saw.
Thank you very much for a thought-provoking discussion. I just wanted to make a short comment about unofficial translation.
Can I ask
Yeah, sure. I am going to introduce myself.
Okay.
My name is Oksana Yakimenko, and I work with Hungarian, Russian, and English. And I'm now working on an expert opinion for a company that ordered a translation, stating that, there was a confidentiality clause, and they're going to fine the agency for using, unofficially using, free. I think somebody was using DeepL in the translation team. So we need to find out where they were actually using, but they're going to fine. So it leads to fines sometimes, not very often, but it does.
Would you like to react to this, or?
Yeah, what I've heard people say is that if I was going to start my studies today, I would specialize in translation law, because it is bound to generate so much court cases. It's building up, and we see occasionally there are reports. I remember once in Slater, I read a newsletter. I read something about a Polish case with the literary translation that had been done with machine translation, and there were fines and court cases and so on and so forth. So I think it is building up.
Thank you. Gabi?
Hello, my name is Gabriela Nagy. I'm a freelance interpreter, translator, and a PhD student here. And my question is twofold, or actually I have 2 questions. One is a little bit what Ingemar already referred to, because I would like to hear your take about the EU AI Act and its most recent birth and passing. How do you think that is going to influence the profession, especially that we have institutional representatives? Like, what's your take in that? Like, I'm not going to give you, words to guide you, but another question that I would have has to do with really high-level AI solutions, such as, for example, WordScope or Code Translator AI. I'm not so sure whether you are familiar with them, but they function fully as a computer-assisted translation tool where you can toggle, switch on and off the AI function, it will rewrite the sentence, it will give you definitions, it will give you summaries. You can also do all sorts of things with that. How do you see the application of such tools in the future? Do you think that special training is going to be required? Because it's a double-fold thing. First, you need translation skills as well as AI skills. Hopefully it's not excessive or whatever, but that would be what I'm interested in.
Who would like to react? Maybe somebody who knows this or has tried this.
Yeah, I can take the first one on AI Act. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So as I said also in my presentation, it was adopted on the 13th of March, and it will take from 1 to 3 years the national transposition. There are lots of critics already about the AI Act, because as you know, what it does right now is that it categorizes the large language models by risk. So there are this risk categorization, and let's say the strongest criticism right now is that if it takes from 1 to 3 years to transpose this law into the national legislation, what will happen in 3 years? Because as we see now, this evolves so rapidly that what's true today might not be valid anymore in a couple of weeks. So there's a lot of criticism also within the institutions, but also in the member states about the AI Act. Let's not forget that the AI Act started before ChatGPT appeared, and they changed it quite a lot already, but I think that there will be definitely changes in the future as well. As it stands today, it's a good text, but indeed, evolution is so rapid in this field that we might need new legislation as well. And also a second thing, this is just Europe, so it has an effect in the European area, and then what about the rest of the world? So I don't know if it answers your question, but yeah, just to conclude, lots of criticism already at EU level as well.
Thank you.
But again, as I said a moment ago, the good news is that this concerns society at large. So it's not just for us, and I think that is something positive. With regard to the second question, I attended a Translating Europe workshop last week in Helsinki online, where the use of CAT tools and machine translation was described by our Swedish colleagues. And they described, we have 3 ways of integrating machine translation when we work in the CAT tool. You could either get proposals individual, where you are in the segment. You could generate the whole segment, or you can translate with machine translation. Different colleagues use this in different ways depending on their preferences. And I very briefly, many years ago, I carried out an interesting internal study together with a Hungarian colleague, Ildikó, on excellence in translation, where we did a modeling of excellence of a number of colleagues who were considered excellent by their peers, in order to see what's the difference that makes the difference. Why are these people excellent and not just very good? And very interestingly, the commonalities that we found were not at the how-to level, which is what you normally search for when you do modeling of excellence, but at the level of beliefs and the mindset and the approach to the work. And this was, we thought it was very interesting, because the conclusion of this is basically that since what matters is that you have the right mindset, then there's not one way of doing this in the best possible way. You have to connect it to what works for you. And in that sense, I don't see any problem in using AI. But the more flexibility we can get into the use of all the technology we have, the more people would have the opportunity to choose the way that is most efficient, provided that our results are, can be extrapolated But we found that very interesting because we expected there to be a commonality on the how-tos.
Thank you very much. I think that was yes, please go ahead. Yes.
Two things. So one for the AI Act, it'll make a difference for the amount of automatic job allocation we're seeing, because allocation of jobs is seen as high risk and can't be completely automated now. And there's a good paper about that by Herbert and Felix de Carmo and some others that was in JOSTRANS last year. It's becoming more common, and often it's involved with the allocation is based on an algorithm which is difficult to reverse engineer, that looks into. So some people who have published things about this, T-Rank from translated.com, for example, have shown what's involved with deciding who will be given a job for translation. So it's not just quality evaluation, it's things like being fast in responding to emails, being timely, responding in a polite manner. These sort of things are becoming more important for automatic job allocation. So while translated.com don't they semi-automate it, they give suggestions that project managers then have a choice whether they accept or not. I think the likelihood is that they're always going to accept the suggestion of the automated service, because if they don't, they're taking the responsibility on themselves for making a decision that jettisons the suggestion. Secondly, in terms of the use of tools, there seems to be no standard way at the moment of integrating AI into existing CAT tools or to building new tools. So I was looking recently at Localize, which is a localization tool, as you might suggest, and they've got different buttons for summarization, for rephrasing, for using things in a different way. But one thing I was reminded of when Ingemar was speaking is that when you look at people who have real expertise, they don't think about what they do step by step. They're internalizing things, they're working in a state of flow, and everything just works. So adding any new feature or function, if it's going to add to efficiency, first of all, it's going to slow things down as they need to start thinking about it, and then it'll start to be built into workflows. And it's not clear yet what the most efficient way of integrating AI is and whether people will work it into their state of flow or not.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your reflections again, and thank you for the questions to the audience. I think it's time to close this session. I would like to thank the interpreters as well and give the floor to my boss, the head of the department, Edina Robin, for the closing words.
I think for ease of communication, I'll try to stick with English as well. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your view on this very intriguing topic. We are right in the middle of it with the training as professionals as well. So these Translating Europe workshops are really useful for us. So thank you again. And I'd like to thank DGT for supporting this Translating Europe workshop, and I particularly would like to thank Eva Spiegel for organizing this event with us. We are really happy to cooperate with her. I would also like to thank the interpreters, and I think we would all like to thank the interpreters. And just a bit of advertisement, I was asked by head of the EMCI training program that we are accepting applications for our EMCI program this year as well. So if you liked the performance of our PhD, of our EMCI students, and you sort of thought, okay, let's forget about machine translation and go into interpreting. So yes, EMCI is a good training program, and we are accepting applications this year. So that was a bit awkward, sorry. So today we still have a bit of coffee and cake, and there's still time to have a chat and for professional networking. And the conference ends today here at ELTE, and tomorrow, Friday, will be a different venue organized by our co-organizer, OFI. So that will be an OFI Academy. So please don't leave Budapest just yet. Come and attend the conference tomorrow as well. There will be even more discussion happening, even more things to learn. So see you there tomorrow. And I would like to thank you all for coming. This has been a very fruitful day today. And I don't know if you were watching the little number in the corner, but there was one point when there were 93 people online as well watching the discussion, listening here. So I think even more people were interested in what we were talking about here than those just sitting here. So have a nice evening, have some nice conversations, and please do not forget to leave your interpreting device there on the table and cross off your name. Don't take it home. We have nice stickers with I love ELTE FTT. Please take those home instead. Okay, so thank you all.